Hello, distinguished guests, and welcome to Aquarium Bright. Here, you will get to see the most dangerous sea and ocean creatures. But don't let what I said mislead you. It's very well possible for you to come across one of these underwater animals during a walk on the beach. So take a look at them carefully now, and you might just avoid a disaster. Is it fish or is it stone? What you're looking at is commonly known as the stonefish, but its fancier names include the dornorn and the sinancia. If you're into diving and observing the underwater, you might already have come across one without noticing. Its appearance makes it almost impossible to distinguish it from a real stone due to its gray coloration and mottled appearance, especially if you're wearing fogged snorkel goggles, so you better pay attention because otherwise the consequences can be unfortunate since stonefish are the most venomous fish known. Although some types of stonefishes are known to live in rivers, and most of them are found in coral reefs near the tropical Pacific and Indian Oceans. Their needle-like dorsal fin spines stick up when they're disturbed or threatened and inject the poison they contain. The most common reason why stonefish stings occur is swimmers stepping on them without realizing it. However, you don't need to be in the water to get stung. Since they can survive out of the water for up to 24 hours, you'll have to watch where you step when you're at the beach as well. Those who got stung by stonefish describe their experience to be extremely distressing. Their venom can result in infection, and in some cases, it is known to cause shock and paralysis. It might come as a bit of a shock, but despite its bad reputation, stonefish is edible if it's prepared properly. When the fish is heated, its venom breaks down. And if the dorsal fins, which are the main source of its venom, are removed, raw stonefish is served as part of sashimi too. This creature might look like it came out of a science fiction movie, but it's very much real. Say hello to the blue-ringed octopuses. Don't be deceived by their small size, which can range between 5 to 8 inches including their arms, because they're packed with venom to cause great damage to as many as 26 people within minutes. Just like stonefishes, blue-ringed octopuses are found in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, from Japan to Australia. They typically live on coral reefs and rocky areas of the seafloor. Some may also be found in tide pools, seagrass, and algal beds. Blue-ringed octopuses are not aggressive in nature. When they're not seeking food such as crabs or shrimps, or searching for a mate, they often hide in marine debris, shells, or crevices. It's only if they're provoked, cornered, or handled that they get dangerous to humans. When they're threatened, they turn bright yellow or blue iridescent rings appear all over their body as a warning display towards the potential predators. Their bites usually come unnoticed, so you might not be able to realize you're bitten until it's too late. The venom of a blue-ringed octopus can cause dizziness and loss of senses and motor skills, and ultimately, paralysis. So, better try to keep your hands to yourself and back away in a hurry if you see one. Nope, it's not a flower bouquet, so don't try to pick and smell one of those pink tube-like things. What's standing before your eyes is a marine animal called a flower urchin. It may look gorgeous, but don't let the looks deceive you. It was named the most dangerous sea urchin in the 2014 Guinness World Records. Flower urchins inhabit the tropical areas of the Indo-West Pacific and are found among coral reefs, rocks, sand, and seagrass beds at depths of 0 to 295 feet. The most noticeable feature of them is their pedicularia, which are claw-shaped defensive organs that are also found in sea stars. What makes flower urchins differ from any other sea urchin is the fact that their pedicularia is, as the name suggests, flower-like, and usually pinkish white to yellowish white in color, with a central purple dot. Hidden underneath those flowers, they possess short and blunt spines. Although many sea urchins deliver their venom through such spines, flower urchins deliver their venom through their pedicularia, or flowers. If they're undisturbed, the tips of these flowers are usually expanded into round, cup-like shapes. On their surface, they possess tiny sensors with which they can detect threats, and once they contact such threats, these flowers immediately snap shut and start injecting venom. What's weird is that the little claws of the flowers can sometimes break off from their stalks, stick to the point of contact, and continue injecting venom for hours into whoever touched it. Yeesh. Looks like a giant puddle of melted strawberry ice cream, right? You wish. It's a lion's mane jellyfish, which is also called giant jellyfish, Arctic red jellyfish, or hairy jelly. They're known to prefer cool water. That's why they can mostly be found in the Arctic, northern Atlantic, and northern Pacific Oceans. But it's possible to spot them around the British Isles or in the Scandinavian waters too. Lion's mane jellyfish are one of the largest known species of jellyfish. They get their name from their long, flowing hair-like tentacles and can reach lengths up to 10 feet. And although the average bell diameter of a lion's mane jellyfish is around 20 inches, they can sometimes attain a diameter of over 7 feet. The largest lion's mane jellyfish recorded was seen in 1865 off the coast of Massachusetts. It was measured to have tentacles around 125 feet long and a diameter of 7 feet. To help you picture it, this is longer than a blue whale. Lion's mane jellyfish hunt by extending their tentacles outward and creating a trap to catch their food. Since they have around 1,200 stinging tentacles, the fish would have to be extremely lucky to be able to escape them. The sting of a lion's mane jellyfish is usually not life-threatening, but you would still want to avoid swimming into its tentacles because it can be very painful to humans. And if you see one washed up on the beach, better not touch it because it can still deliver a sting long after they've been on the shore. Fun fact, the lion's mane jellyfish appears in the Sherlock Holmes story, The Adventure of the Lion's Mane, as a suspect. But don't worry, we won't give you any spoilers. The last marine animal you're seeing now is a sea snake, and yes, they are different from eels. There are 69 identified species of sea snakes. Most of them can be found in the tropical and subtropical waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and they have been around for millions of years. To make things easier, scientists have separated all different species of sea snakes into two categories: true sea snakes and sea kraits. Whereas true sea snakes spend almost all their time at sea, sea kraits can spend some time on land as well. If you see a snake on the beach, you can tell whether it's a land or sea snake by looking at its tail. If it's paddle-like, then that's a sea snake you got there, but make sure to keep your distance in both cases. All sea snakes need to surface regularly to breathe since they have no gills. That's why you can come across one while swimming. If that happens, you better swim away as fast as you can because most sea snakes have more venom than the average cobra or rattlesnake. However, since they only attack if provoked, bites are quite rare. One more cool fact about sea snakes: they are the only reptiles to give birth in the oceans. The majority of sea snakes keep the eggs within themselves and give birth to nearly fully formed snakes while swimming. That's except for the yellow-lipped sea krait though. They come onto land to lay eggs of their little ones. Remember the stonefish from the beginning of our tour? They're hunted by sea snakes. Blame the food chain.
Now the first rule is not to panic, the guy says. He gives Michael a thick suit. The weather is hot here, and the outfit seems very warm. You can't go without it, he adds. Michael puts on the outfit and feels goosebumps all over his body. Why is it so cold? The guide explains this is a unique cooling cloth. It'll save Michael from heat stroke inside the cave. The guide gives him an oxygen tank and a mask. Are we gonna dive? Michael asks. No, but your lungs may fill up with water if you don't use it. Michael's knees are shaking with fear. He doubts this whole idea. Welcome to one of the most dangerous caves on the planet, the guy says as he enters the dark space at the foot of a mountain. This place is called Crystal Cave, and it's located in Mexico. Magma had leaked here from the hot bowels of our planet 26 million years ago. It was coming and cooling down again and again. There was so much magma that it formed a mountain. Along with magma, mineral-rich water got here. It had been seeping through the rock tunnels and had formed a cave under the hill. Then, something strange appeared in these hot waters, something that seems to be from another planet. Michael is going down the road. He illuminates the bottomless darkness with a flashlight. The air becomes hot and heavy. Microscopic particles of water are hovering here. Along with a guide, Michael descends to 980 feet. This is more than half of the Empire State Building's height. The air temperature goes up. It feels as if they were approaching the Earth's core. Finally, the descent ends, and they jump on solid ground. The guy puts on an oxygen mask and tells Michael to do the same. You can't breathe in such moist and acidic air. The lungs can fill with water, which will lead to disastrous consequences. The air here feels to Michael as if he's walking through a very thick fog. The temperature rises up to 136 degrees Fahrenheit. It's higher than in the world's most hot deserts. Michael lights his way and notices something big, white, and shiny. It's a huge crystal beam sticking out of the ground that's reaching up. The whole cave is filled with these huge things. They stretch in different directions and rest against the ceiling and the walls. Somewhere they block the path, and somewhere they are like bridges. Michael climbs onto one of the crystals and walks on it. The guide explains that each column is made of gypsum. You know this substance as it's used to produce building material, plasterboard. Michael touches the hard surface of one of them. It seems that some ancient civilization could have built it. The guide says that everything inside this cave is natural. For the first time, this place was discovered by 2 miners in the year 2000. Since then, scientists have managed to find out that some crystals are 500,000 years old. You can also find one of the largest natural crystals in the world here. This beam is about 36 feet long and weighs 55 tons. This place is filled with water rich in calcium sulfate. This element is capable of forming minerals. A colorless variety of gypsum prevails here. The water and warm air help form the crystals. Humidity and temperature haven't changed for centuries, so these columns continue to grow even now. This place is fascinating. Michael wants to stay here longer to explore the cave, but unfortunately, it's dangerous. They may get lost or slip on the gypsum rocks. Plus, they're running out of oxygen, so they have to climb back up. They come out of the cave and meet the police. It turns out that it's prohibited for tourists to enter the cave. Even scientists must get special permission to go here. And it's for a good reason, since the cave is one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Michael and the guy pay a fine and leave Mexico. The next stop is Italy. It's a good thing you've taken a good camera with you, the guide says. This is one of the most fascinating caves in the world. You need the best equipment to capture this beauty. Michael and the guide are on a small boat. They sail along the coast of the island of Capri, Italy. Luckily, there won't be any danger this time. They are approaching a small rift inside the mountain. This is the entrance to the Blue Grotto. The hole is so tiny that only one boat can pass through it. Michael and the guide get into another dimension. The cave is filled with water. The walls are shining with blue light coming from the lake's depths. Michael takes pictures of the cave and notices that the entrance they got through glows with a bright white light. It's the sun's rays illuminating the cave as they enter it. There's another hole under the water. The sunlight penetrates through it, filling the lake with a blue glow. But it's time to move on. The next cave is in New Zealand. They arrive to the North Island. There's a place deep underground with winding, intricate caves. They appeared here about 30 billion years ago. Michael and the guide approach the entrance to the dark cave. Michael turns on a flashlight. "Take it away," the guy says. "You won't need it inside." They come in. Michael opens his mouth in surprise. The whole cave is filled with glowing lanterns. They are all living creatures, fireflies. They're shining with a blue light. Michael feels like he's on another planet. The entrance to the cave is limited to not harm the fireflies. Scientists use automated equipment to monitor the cave. They watch the temperature and the level of carbon dioxide necessary to maintain the life of glowing beetles. If many people get here, the level of carbon dioxide will increase. The time for a visit is also limited, so they ask Michael and the guide to leave the place. "Now, we're going to see something creepy," the guide says. "Are you ready?" And the next stop is California. The place is called Moaning Caverns. The cave seems quite ordinary from the outside, but the guide looks a little nervous and scared. They attach the rope to the belt and begin the long descent. The bottom is 165 feet deep. It's the height of a 15-story building. It seems not so big compared to the Crystal Cave. As Michael is going lower, it's getting cold and dark. At this point, all sounds from above disappear. They slowly sink into an ominous silence. "What is it?" Michael asks, startled. "I think I've heard someone's voice downstairs." The guide touches his lips with his finger to keep Michael silent. A long, prolonged human moan is coming from the dark cave depths. In the first seconds, Michael freezes. Then he quickly climbs up along the rope. The guide laughs at him. They hear another moan. Michael gets out of the cave and pulls the guide's rope to get him out. The guide says this is one of the creepiest caves in the world. The air and wind circulate deep inside and create a sound similar to a moan. Tourists often go down there to tickle their nerves. Also, they found about 100 skeletons of ancient people at the bottom of the cave, and no one knows how they got there. Michael doesn't want to go back inside the cave. He asks the guide to tell him how caves form. It turns out that it all starts when the ground absorbs acid rain consisting of water and carbon dioxide. The liquid penetrates through the soil and comes into contact with hard rock surfaces. When water touches limestone or dolomite, it dissolves them and helps to form an empty space. Every year there's more and more space around. The rain continues to fall and accumulate in this open area. Then the water forms a stream or an underground river. After that, the erosion of hard rocks begins. Thousands of years later, there's enough space to fit a human here. Then this space becomes a cave. When erosion combines with stalactites and stalagmites, it forms chambers and impressive columns. By the way, here's the difference between stalactites and stalagmites. Stalactites hang from the ceiling. Stalagmites stick out of the ground. It takes about 1 million years to develop such underground landscapes. So, every time you walk in these places, you come into contact with the ancient past of our planet. If you walk through this small stone doorway in Hierapolis, Turkey, you might never come back alive. Back in ancient times, people thought it was some sort of portal to the underworld. Romans would go in carrying perfectly healthy bulls, but after a few minutes, they would watch these animals collapse as if hit by some mysterious force. But what's even weirder is that nothing happened to people. They could walk in and out just fine. Now, recent studies might have an answer for these eerie happenings, and it all has to do with people's heights. The gate, known as Plutonium, named after Pluto, the deity of the underworld, is a stone doorway leading to a small 32-square-foot cave. But the real danger is what is going on beneath it. Hierapolis is a super active geological area, and there's a big crack under the city that constantly emits volcanic carbon dioxide, which comes up as a visible mist. During the day, the sun dissipates the gas. At night, the gas forms some kind of a carbon dioxide lake on the sheltered arena floor. At dawn, you need to get out of there before it's too late. This whole place can turn particularly life-threatening right before the sun rises, when the carbon dioxide concentration, about 15 inches above the arena floor, reaches 35%. That means birds, bulls, and even humans can suffocate and pass away in just a couple of minutes. But there is a scientific reason that explains how Romans could get out of there unharmed. The carbon dioxide concentration drops quickly with height, so animals perished while their handlers, being taller and standing up, could walk out and breathe safely. Most people can't stay inside the Begarn fort after sunset. This 16th century fort, located about 146 miles from Delhi, is known as one of the most haunted places in India. During the day, the area is bustling with visitors who can walk through the main gate of this once grand fort city and check out the ruins of temples and palaces. But they will also see this big sign at the gate that dramatically warns everybody that all access is strictly forbidden after dark. That's probably because at night, according to locals, women can be heard screaming and crying in that place, along with the sounds of bangles breaking and strange music. Others have reported seeing shadowy figures and flashing lights among the ruins, or even smelling a strange perfume floating around. Yawata-no-Yabushirasu is one of Japan's most restricted forests, located in Ichikawa. The forest itself is a small area, covering just a little more than 40 square yards, and it is mostly a thick patch of mosu bamboo. Its location next to a parking lot and modern buildings makes it seem less intimidating, but don't be mistaken by its appearance. Since at least the 19th century, people have said that anyone who enters this forest is bound to disappear and never be seen again. So, as soon as you arrive, a sign near the forest tells you about its history and the curse believed to be linked to it. Some rumors suggest the creepy presence of an ancient samurai lord walking around. Other legends say that the forest hides a bottomless pit filled with poisonous gas. Whether these stories are true or not, today, the area is enclosed by stone walls, and entry is still strictly prohibited. In a valley called the Dark Entry Forest in Connecticut, you will find Dudleytown, but you definitely shouldn't go inside. Not only has the land been private property since the 1920s, but it is also known as one of the spookiest places on Earth. This place was first settled in the early 1740s, and many of the original settlers were from the Dudley family. That's why it's called Dudleytown. There's a local rumor that the town's founders were descended from Edmund Dudley, an English nobleman who lost his life for treason. The legend says this curse followed the Dudley family all the way across the Atlantic to America, and their misfortune is said to be responsible for crop failures, mental problems, and several tragic incidents in the village. Again, it is all just rumors, since historians haven't found any real evidence to support these claims. Still, the pitch-black surroundings and the eerie Blair Witch Project vibe going on in that place fueled ghost stories in the 1980s. This led to many cases of vandalism in the following decade, and because of that, the landowners closed the area to the public. This old abandoned building used to be the fancy palace of King Farouk's family, who was the penultimate king of Egypt back in 1936. After his family members passed away, the palace was turned into a morgue. Locals say that today, the whole place is super creepy and off-limits. Some people have reported seeing light bulbs flicker and shadows move around, making strange noises. Once, a group of kids allegedly went inside and totally freaked out when they found all the doors had suddenly disappeared, leaving them in complete darkness. They had no choice but to start screaming for help. This Hawaiian island has been off-limits to people for over a century. It's called Ni'iau and is the smallest inhabited island in Hawaii, covering around 69.5 square miles. It has around 84 residents. The island doesn't have cell phone service, paved roads, or power lines, just solar panels for electricity. A single family has privately owned the island since 1864, when a Scottish farmer bought it for $10,000, which would be around $250,000 today. The island has stayed in the family, passing down to its descendants, the Robinsons. They have kept it private ever since, so access is highly restricted and basically by invitation only. The Erdstall tunnels are a network of about 2,000 mysterious underground passageways mainly found in Central Europe, especially in Austria and Bavaria. These tunnels are usually narrow and cramped, often just wide enough for one person to squeeze through at a time, and they are believed to date back to the Middle Ages, as far back as the 12th century. What's really puzzling about these tunnels is their purpose. Despite a lot of research, nobody really knows why they were built. There is a theory that they were used for storage, but since many of them are below the waterline and occasionally get filled with water, that doesn't seem very practical. These tunnels have very light, almost claustrophobic sections and sudden drops, which doesn't seem practical for other straightforward uses like escape routes, hiding places, or even spiritual purposes. To make things even more mysterious, there is a complete lack of artifacts, which makes it even harder for researchers to figure out what these tunnels were really for. Since 2019, adventurous people can get arrested if they try to climb this rock. Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, has been off-limits because it is now considered a sacred site for local communities. But the fact that it is also extremely dangerous probably played a big role in the decision to close it off to visitors. This rock is 1,142 feet high, which is about the height of an 80-story building. The climb to the summit can be very slippery, and high temperatures, which can hit 116 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, have led to people passing away from dehydration and heat-related issues. Something even creepier happens at the top of the rock right after storms. When it rains, small tadpole-like crustaceans called shield shrimp hatch in temporary waterholes and rock pools on top of Uluru. These extraterrestrial-looking creatures are about 3 inches long, and they spread their super-resilient eggs everywhere. When enough summer rain comes, they hatch and go wild, feeding on microorganisms and bacteria in the water. How these strange creatures end up in the fleeting pools on top of Uluru is still unclear, but the most likely explanation is that their eggs might travel there with the wind.
The sea, this unrelenting water beast, has been defying all attempts to tame it for centuries. Many ships driven by the wind have gone through the harshest parts of the world. Some have survived the struggle with the sea, and many have come off second best. It's the year 1834. A ship called the Pilgrim is setting a course to sail from California to Boston. The journey will venture around South America and then past Cape Horn of Chile. Richard signs up as a merchant seaman aboard the Pilgrim. This is his first voyage at sea. The crew tells Richard stories of the Drake Passage off Cape Horn, a route that's legendary for its dangers. Countless ships and sailors have disappeared in those waters. Since Cape Horn's discovery in 1526, it's quickly become known to all those that have sailed around it as the ultimate test of any mariner's skill and of any ship's strength. Those that have survived the journey call Cape Horn a sailor's nightmare. Jack the helmsman, a salty veteran, steers the ship towards this most dangerous of all routes. Jack has been aboard the Pilgrim since it was first commissioned in 1825. He's passed by the Horn many times, each time learning a different lesson from the tests provided by the sea. The Pilgrim has been refitted since its past voyage a year ago. Richard values Jack's experience, given that it's his first journey at sea. Jack assures Richard of his confidence in the Pilgrim, even though it's just a small wooden brig with 2 masts. Jack's aware that wooden vessels are gradually becoming outdated, replaced by new steam-powered ships. But Jack prefers the maneuverability of the Pilgrim and would take it over the steel ships any day. Richard is excited to be aboard. There's so much to explore in life as a merchant seaman, but the guy struggles to acquire his sea legs on the boat. Forceful winds make the Pilgrim move faster, providing Richard with a quick introduction to life at sea. At the same time, nothing can prepare him for what is to be experienced at Cape Horn. It's the southernmost point of land before Antarctica. The gap between the icy continent and Cape Horn holds the infamous Drake Passage. Approximately 700 miles between Cape Horn and the Antarctic Peninsula. Strong winds provide an uninterrupted, steadfast journey toward the Horn. But, as Jack tells Richard, the winds are more concentrated at the Drake Passage. They create a funneling effect, becoming stronger and more unpredictable. Richard is unsure of what this might mean for the Pilgrim, but understands that there's no easier route to travel around South America. A few days pass. The Pilgrim sails by the many islands that make up the western coast of Chile. Although the sea has been relatively calm, Richard continues to deal with his lack of sea legs. His movements are still not very graceful. The constant, ever-swaying deck rises and falls, and Richard finds it hard to get used to the motion. Random large waves hit the Pilgrim from every angle. The ship is quickly approaching Cape Horn. Richard looks towards great thunderous black clouds in the distance. "Welcome to the Horn," Jack says, half laughing. A wry smile upon his face soon disappears. The man gets serious, knowing what awaits them all. Stronger winds start blowing the sails as the crew scrambles to hang onto the ropes. Richard desperately sets to adjust the aft sails, adjusting for the constant change in strong southerly winds. Jack holds firm at the helm, knowing the importance of his role. He's wary of the swell. It can build very quickly the further south they travel. It's crucial the Pilgrim doesn't venture too close to the horn when they approach. The great darkness that was in the distance is now all around them, filling the sky in every direction. Blackened clouds throw rain and hail down at the crew as they try to resist the enraged weather. Jack is directed by the captain at the helm, changing the direction of the vessel. The temperature has dropped significantly. Barely keeping the water from his eyes, he turns toward the port side bow to provide his face a brief break from the torment of the wind. Looking out into the distance, the man sees the horn standing alone, surrounded by mist. It's a haunting sight. He steers the Pilgrim along the face of the horn, the distance getting shorter. The waves shrink in height since the depths become shallower, but these waves are much steeper and their angle can cause more damage to the wooden vessel. Jack's unsure how much of these waves the Pilgrim can take before the hull is breached. Richard, still posted at the aft sails, watches the water and icebergs floating by. He's unsure how large they actually are, since they're mostly hidden underwater. But he knows to alert Jack if any get too close. Just one iceberg hitting the Pilgrim will be all that the hull can withstand. Dutifully, he watches over the side and into the distance. Icebergs aren't the only thing to look out for. Rogue waves are common in these seas as well. The connecting Antarctic and Pacific Oceans, mixed with stormy weather, form waves together. This creates much larger rogue waves. Such waves have been known to reach up to 100 feet tall. They can destroy most vessels in their path. It'll surely be the end of the Pilgrim if it comes across a rogue wave. Strong currents adjust the route of the Pilgrim, as though the horn is trying to lure the ship toward its rocky shallows. Slowly, they are getting pulled closer toward the horn. Jack is fighting the current at the helm. Spinning the wheel, he strains his body as much as he can. Grunting, he plunges the wheel from the port side to starboard and back again. The captain keeps yelling directions. To a novice, they're extremely confusing. But Jack, a hardened veteran, continues to interpret the directions with ease, steering to readjust their course away from the horn. The captain orders Richard to assess the hull below the decks. With the level of pounding the Drake Passage has provided so far, it's surely harmed the ship in some way. Richard runs to the deck as another sailor yells something at him, but the noise of the sea makes it difficult to hear. A wave hits the side, flowing onto the deck. Richard manages to hang onto the mast before he's almost swept overboard. The entire front deck seems to be underwater. Hanging on as the water rolls off the sides of the ship and waiting for it to clear, Richard watches the horn slowly go past. Still, it beckons toward the Pilgrim, as though asking for its dues from the crew. The currents are still pulling the ship, while the storm is raging on, with no end of the struggle in sight. The storm is growing ever larger and fiercer. Richard gathers himself to head below and assess the damage. After a slow descent to the lower decks, Richard can finally look over the hull from the ship's quarters. There's no damage from what he can gather. But he's shocked by the depth of the water inside. It's now at waist depth. Cups, amongst other things, float in the water. Even inside the ship, the guy can't escape the waves. Unable to make sense of it all, he stands frozen, listening to the almighty power of Mother Nature outside. The sea roars even more wildly, waves constantly thudding against the hull. It sounds like a somber drumbeat, a slow countdown to the demise of the Pilgrim. Richard forces himself back to the terrors of the above decks, grasping onto the rails to carefully walk the slippery stairs. He leaves the disturbing creaks of the wooden decks. They're soon replaced with the strained sounds of the ropes, the yells of other sailors, and the deafening roar of the sea crashing all around him. Jack is at the helm, focused on his role, still fighting the wind and the waves, even with the addition of ice and frost. It seems that the world around him has set its heart to distract the man from his duty, but Jack pushes on determinedly. For 9 days, the Pilgrim fights the constant changes in stormy weather, facing all kinds of obstacles, but the ship manages to make it through. As they leave the storm behind, The crew sets their course north for their final destination. The sight of the sun peeking through the dark clouds is the most relieving thing Richard has ever experienced. Unfortunately, Richard lost his rations at some stage during the storm. At sea, if your rations are lost, it's your own bad luck. Luckily, Jack is kind enough to share some of his.
On September 16th of 2023, without warning, the Earth began to hum. A low, strange vibration reverberated through the crust. This set off seismic alarms all across the globe. For 9 days straight, the planet was pulsing with this horrifying rhythm, and scientists had no idea what was going on. Meanwhile, the total disaster was happening in Greenland. It wasn't an earthquake. They knew that much. They could tell it by the rhythm. Since we all live on giant tectonic plates, they constantly move and slide on magma like icebergs on water. Sometimes as they move, they can rub against each other or collide or break. In any case, all this causes an incredible release of energy that sends shockwaves through the ground. That's when we feel the ground literally shaking, and it's what we call an earthquake. These vibrations we feel are called seismic waves. Seismometers pick them up as pings or rumbles. In a typical earthquake, they create a bunch of different frequencies. It's a crazy chaotic mix of low and high frequencies, like smashing every piano key. What was weird about the Greenland event is that the signals weren't like that at all. It was a steady, single-frequency vibration, as if some ancient machine was stirring beneath the Earth. It's like one piano key being struck over and over, creating a doom-like, repetitive sound. Turns out, what they were hearing wasn't the noise of tectonic plates going wild. It was a phenomenon seismologists had never seen before. The days passed, and the mysterious noise just kept going. The vibrations repeated every 90 seconds, echoing around the world. The hunt for answers was growing more desperate. Seismologists had no idea what they were dealing with. They had to gather a huge international team of 68 people from 15 countries. All these scientists were gathering seismic data, satellite images, and doing some advanced math for several days, until they finally realized who the culprit was. Water. It all happened in a remote, desolate region of East Greenland. This place is full of fjords, narrow inlets of the sea between high cliffs, kinda like deep water-filled valleys surrounded by towering rocky sides. In this area, surrounded by jagged peaks and icy waters, the air was still. The landscape seemingly frozen in time. Nothing here changed much for years, until one day. A colossal landslide has unfolded in the Dixon Fjord. One of those steep mountainsides towering over the fjord at almost 4,000 feet high collapsed in a massive landslide. Picture a huge chunk of this mountain crumbling and crashing down into the fjord below. This sent a deluge of rock and ice crashing into the water. The impact was just apocalyptic, 882 million cubic feet of debris. That's enough ice and rock to fill 10,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, or 10 Great Pyramids of Giza. And all this nightmare hurled into the water with such force that it kick-started a tsunami about 360 feet high, taller than the Statue of Liberty, into the air. What's crazy is that this incredibly powerful wave was trapped in the fjord by narrow cliffs, unable to escape. It's like water sloshing in a closed bathtub. For 9 days, the mega-tsunami continued to churn through it. That's why we heard this endless hum. It was a rhythmic back and forth of the water slamming against the walls. The shockwaves were rippling deep into Earth's crust, vibrations so strong that they were picked up by seismometers around the globe. This was a phenomenon so rare, so unprecedented, that it left scientists stunned. It turned out to be a perfect storm of elements. A glacier, weakened by years of warming, could no longer bear the weight of the mountain above. This collapse was inevitable. and the chaos literally shook the Earth to its core. And people often hang out in this area with cruise ships passing by. We're lucky that no lives were lost in the disaster. It was a close call though. A tourist ship stranded in the area just 2 days before narrowly escaped the tsunami's reach by pure luck. But it doesn't mean there were no losses. The waves destroyed a nearby Inuit site, which was there untouched for over 200 years. They also swept away the huts at a research station that were about 43 miles away. The vibrations traveled from Greenland to the South Pole in less than an hour. That just shows how dangerous events like this can be. And this isn't the only place where such catastrophes are happening. In the beautiful California community of Rancho Palos Verdes, the ground is shifting so quickly that it's tearing homes apart. The land there has always been kinda unstable. It has some unique geology. It's built on soft, clay-rich soil and sits on a geological fault line, which makes it prone to landslides. This means that this land is prone to slow, natural shifting over many years, even when no crazy weather is happening. It's been like this for decades, but usually it's slow and pretty manageable, like about a foot a year. Imagine a tree that you played with as a kid moving 20 feet to the left as you grow up. For decades, residents adapted. They built their homes on adjustable beams. This helped the houses to move with the land, and that strategy worked well until now. Recently, things have been getting much worse in the community. Now, the land is moving by a foot in a single week. That would be like if the same tree moved almost 960 feet since you were a child. The past 2 years have also caused some heavy rains, and the weather has been getting worse. This increased water content in the soil. The land became heavier and more prone to rapid movement. Now, this once idyllic seaside escape turned into a disaster zone. Cracks have appeared in closets, gardens, and roads, growing larger with each passing day. Streets that were once smooth are now buckled and twisted, with roads turning into a crazy theme park. Houses that once stood firm are being ripped from their foundations, some of them split in half. One of the houses had its front door 8 feet off the ground. Entire neighborhoods have been plunged into chaos. Utility companies had to switch off gas and electricity indefinitely to prevent potential disasters. The hardest hit is the coastal neighborhood of Portuguese Bend, where residents are living on the edge, literally. It always had amazing ocean views and cool sea breezes, with horses and peacocks still wandering the tree-lined streets. But now, it's like an earthquake hit. Only this time, the earth isn't stopping. For many, this place feels like paradise, if only the land would stop shifting beneath their feet. So the locals don't give up. Some of them had to leave, but many are determined to stay and fight, despite the destruction. But they still have to pour in hundreds of thousands of dollars to save their properties. People have installed generators to keep the lights on and set up sewer systems and pumps to drain the groundwater causing the landslides. Some say that the only way for these neighborhoods to survive might be to go completely off-grid, installing power walls to store energy and stuff like that. People are trying their best to run the sewer system off generators. They hope that they could get rid of this water in the soil that's causing these hellish landslides in the first place. They're determined to fight, but they will need help and support from the government to fight this disaster. Landslides are actually more common across the US than many might think. And new maps and data show that tons of people in the country might be in danger. Scientists managed to create the first very detailed, very cool map that shows where these landslides might happen, county by county. It's based on a lot of data and the history of 1 million previous landslides. They say that nearly 40% of the United States is at risk of experiencing landslide activity, which could lead to some insane catastrophes in certain areas. Luckily, now both residents and engineers can keep this in mind. But all this shows how vulnerable we are to natural disasters and how we should always stay alerted.
Hey now, get ready to dive into the Sea of Mysteries, also known as the Black Sea. It is the largest inland body of water in the world, bigger than the entire state of California. It has dozens of lost ships and some secret underwater tunnels. And some people believe it's an ancient quarry that was mined out in 6 stages. The Black Sea has distinct vertical layers that don't mix, with higher and lower salinity. The salty water comes from the Mediterranean, and fresh water comes from rivers. 10 of the largest rivers in Europe flow into the Black Sea. It receives more fresh water from the rivers and rainfall than it loses from evaporation. The extra water flows through the Bosphorus into the Marmara Sea. There are 2 flows going through the straits. The upper flow leaves the Black Sea and takes surface water out of it. The bottom flow carries salt water from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. That's why the upper layers of the Black Sea are less dense than its saltier lower layers. The oxygen that comes from the atmosphere and photosynthesis stays in the surface layers. Everything deeper than about 300 feet in the middle and up to 500 feet near the edge is not fit for life. Only certain bacteria can survive in these conditions. Although there's no air deep down in the Black Sea, the upper layer is home to around 750 species of phytoplankton. Eggs and larvae of fish and invertebrates chill in coastal regions. There are also 180 fish species in the Black Sea, and some of them are valuable, such as horse mackerel, spiny dogfish, and sprat. The water level in the Black Sea is always the same because there are no high or low tides, so the sea is always calm, quiet, and serene on the surface. But it has one surprise feature: an underwater river. It's a current of salty water flowing through the Bosphorus Strait and along the seabed. This amazing discovery was made by scientists from the University of Leeds and was announced in 2010. It's the first undersea river of its kind ever found. The river forms because salty water from the Mediterranean Sea spills through the Bosphorus Strait into the Black Sea, where the water is much less salty. The no-air zone of the sea is an ideal conservation chamber for what's hiding on its bottom. The Black Sea is like a treasure trove for shipwrecks, and we discovered it by accident. Some maritime archaeologists were studying sea levels to see how quickly the water levels rose after the last ice age, and they ran across over 40 previously unknown shipwrecks as a complete bonus. Researchers used 2 remotely operated vehicles to explore the seafloor and the wrecks. Thanks to it, we have a video and detailed 3D images of the ships that were stitched together from thousands of high-resolution photos. According to the New York Times, some of the standout discoveries among the 44 ships found include a medieval training vessel from the 13th or 14th century. Expedition members nicknamed another ship from the Ottoman Empire the Flower of the Black Sea for its beautiful petal carvings. The team also noticed unusual details on other ships, like coiled ropes, chisel marks, rudders, and other carvings. So far, they haven't announced any plans to excavate the shipwrecks, but the ships might be filled with historical treasures like books, parchments, and documents. It's worth a try to rescue them. The most extraordinary discovery in the Black Sea is what archaeologists believe to be the world's oldest intact shipwreck. It has been lying undisturbed for over 2,400 years. This ancient Greek vessel, 75 feet long, was found with its mast, rudders, and rowing benches all still in place, over a mile beneath the surface. Researchers believe the ship was a trading vessel, like those depicted on ancient Greek pottery, such as the Siren vase in the British Museum. This vase, or vase, dating from the same period, shows a vessel carrying Odysseus past the Sirens. The team took a small piece for carbon dating, and the results confirmed it as the oldest intact shipwreck known to humankind. The fact that it's so elaborate and well-preserved deserves a standing ovation for shipbuilders of the ancient world. Without microbes, worms, or other creatures to eat away the wrecks, it's no wonder the ships are in almost perfect condition. If the Titanic had sunk in these waters, we would have found it in a much better state now, not being eaten by nasty underwater microorganisms. Now, there's an interesting theory called the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, which suggests a huge flood happened around 7,500 years ago. 2 geologists in the 1990s suggested that at the end of the last ice age, when the Earth's climate was heating up, ice sheets were melting and sea levels were rising. The Black Sea was a much smaller freshwater lake. It was separated from the Mediterranean Sea by a natural dam at the Bosphorus Strait. As global sea levels rose, the Mediterranean overflowed into the Black Sea basin. They suggest the sea level rose by 6 inches every day, flooded coastal settlements, and changed the environment for good. Samples from the Black Sea floor show a sudden shift from freshwater to marine species around that time, which means there was a rapid influx of salt water. Underwater surveys have also found what look like the old shorelines and human-made structures. So, people were living in areas now submerged by the Black Sea. Plus, the timing of this flood matches up with known patterns of human migration into Europe, Asia, and Africa. They also say this flood could be the terrible flood from the story of Noah's Ark. Critics of the deluge theory say the evidence isn't as straightforward as it seems. Some think the transition from freshwater to saltwater in the Black Sea was more gradual than one sudden flood. They're also debating if people left the settlements before they went underwater or as a result. An old chronicle that's been around for about a century says there were 2 underground tunnels starting in what is now Romania and Bulgaria and stretching all the way under the Black Sea to Turkey. Back in the day, peasants used these tunnels to move their flocks of sheep to the Ottoman Empire and countries on the Asia Minor Peninsula. Who built these tunnels and why they run under the sea is a complete mystery. At some point, the entrances to these tunnels were sealed off for national security and were under tight guard. The security forces knew all about these massive tunnels and kept them off limits. In the 1980s, a group of people working on the Danube-Black Sea Canal accidentally found another entrance to these mysterious tunnels. This one was in a cemetery in a town of Romania. Canal workers used it to regularly cross over into Bulgaria. One more cool thing about these 2 tunnels is that some people think they were built thousands of years ago. If you ever try to dig a tunnel under the sea, you'll know how tricky it is even now with all the tech we have. So if the tunnels are really that old, whoever built them was super advanced for their time. Now, there's an urban legend that says that the Black Sea has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle. Fishers describe some wild whirlpool that appears out of nowhere and drags entire flocks of birds, ships, and even small islands under the sea. And once, things got even wilder with a ship that vanished under weird conditions in 1944. It was during daylight, and some black fog with green flashing sparkles suddenly surrounded the vessel. No one has ever seen it since, and no one knows for sure if the story is true. But it sure adds a spooky touch to the mysteries of the Black Sea.
It was the beginning of the 20th century, and 2 rivals, Robert Scott and Roald Amundsen, set on their expeditions to become the first people in history to reach the South Pole. The race wasn't easy, and it ended tragically for Scott. Amundsen has won and set his tent on the pole before his rivals. A member of Scott's expedition known as Terra Nova, British geologist Thomas Griffith Taylor, not only survived the harsh conditions but also made an unexpected discovery. He found a waterfall of what appeared to be blood at the rocky base of the glacier, which now has his name, in 1911. It took scientists more than a century to figure out what is behind the eerie coloring. A team of American scientists journeyed to Taylor Glacier with powerful electron microscopes to analyze its contents. Previous studies had scratched the surface of the Crimson Enigma, but no one had previously done a full-scale analysis of its mineralogical makeup. These researchers unleashed a whole arsenal of analytical equipment and spotted little iron-rich nanospheres. These teeny-tiny particles, 1/100th the size of human red blood cells, originate from ancient microbes. They flourish abundantly in the meltwaters of Taylor Glacier. These nanospheres are jam-packed with iron, silicon, calcium, aluminum, and sodium, forming a unique composition that paints the subglacial water a vivid shade of red. These nanospheres don't have the usual crystalline structure found in minerals, which is why previous detection methods failed to spot them. Taylor Glacier's icy depths harbor an ancient microbial community that has thrived in isolation for thousands or possibly even millions of years. This discovery could help us in the search for life outside of Earth. Dr. Ken Levy, a research scientist at Johns Hopkins University, has some impressive expertise in planetary materials and the analysis of Martian samples. He decided to find out what would happen if a Mars rover landed in Antarctica. Could it figure out what makes bloodfalls so mesmerizingly red? So, researchers treated bloodfalls as a simulated Martian landing site. They used techniques inspired by the rovers exploring the red planet. The samples they collected were sent to Johns Hopkins processing facilities. There, Livy unleashed the power of transmission electron microscopy and revealed the enigmatic nanospheres. He made the conclusion that our current methods of analyzing other planets' surfaces with rovers fall short. They can't unravel the true nature of environmental materials, especially on chilly planets like Mars. These materials might be super tiny and non-crystalline, throwing off our detection methods. To truly grasp the essence of rocky planets, we'll need transmission electron microscopes. Strapping one onto a Mars rover isn't feasible yet, but it could mean a start of a new era in space exploration. Have you ever seen a waterfall on fire? Every February, when the stars align just right, Horsetail Fall in Yosemite National Park gets a sensational makeover. As the sun sets, its rays hit the waterfall at the perfect angle, transforming it into a blazing display of vibrant orange and red hues. We don't know exactly who and when discovered this natural miracle. The original valley dwellers may have known about it, but they kept it to themselves. It wasn't until 1973 that photographer Galen Rowell captured the first known photo of the waterfall, bringing it into the limelight. Since then, the firefall has become a global sensation, spreading like wildfire on social media and drawing crowds from far and wide. This magnificent cascade draws hundreds of spectators every year, but they can only see the show under certain conditions. First things first, Horsetail Fall needs a flowing stream. If there's not enough snowpack in February, the waterfall won't have enough water to create the magic. The temperatures must be warm enough to melt the snowpack during the day. If it's too chilly, the snow will stay frozen, and the fiery spectacle won't ignite. Second, we need a clear western sky at sunset. Those sunbeams need a straight path to hit Horsetail Fall and make it come alive. And since the weather in Yosemite is ever-changing, clouds can magically clear up just in time for the show. If all the conditions are just right, you'll witness the Yosemite firefall in all its glory for about 10 minutes. The mystery of the sailing stones in California's Death Valley National Park has puzzled scientists for years. Heavy stones seem to have a mind of their own and move across Racetrack Playa, a dried-up lake bed. They leave behind a trail on the cracked mud. There were all kinds of theories to explain this phenomenon, from magnetic fields or dust devils, which are strong whirlwinds, to mischievous pranksters. No one has actually witnessed these rocks in action, which only added to the mystery. In 2006, a NASA scientist named Ralph Lorenz entered the scene. He was studying weather conditions on other planets, but he couldn't resist the allure of Death Valley and those elusive sailing stones. He had an eureka moment while tinkering at his kitchen table with a Tupperware container. Lorenz filled the container with water, leaving a small rock poking out, and chucked it in the freezer. Then he placed this icy construction in a big tray of water with sand at the bottom and gently blew on it. The rock began to glide across the water, leaving a trail in the sand. Lorenz had been studying how ice can make big rocks float and move along tidal beaches in the Arctic Sea. Applying this knowledge, he and his research team figured out that, under certain winter conditions in Death Valley, enough water and ice could form to make the rocks float across Racetrack Playa in a light breeze. And as they glided, they left their mark in the muddy terrain. The River of Five Colors, Cano Cristales in Colombia, has the unofficial title of the most beautiful river in the world. For most of the year, it looks like any other regular river. The real magic happens between the wet and dry seasons when the water level is just perfect. This unique river floor is lined with a special plant, and when the conditions are right, it bursts into a dazzling display of colors. Think vibrant reds, stunning yellows, and lush greens, all mingling with the blue water. It's like stepping into a living rainbow with 1,000 shades in between. This phenomenal display only lasts for a few weeks, from September through November. During Colombia's wet season, the river flows too fast and deep, covering up the river floor and denying the plant the sunlight it needs to turn red. And in the dry season, there's simply not enough water to support the vibrant life in the river. So you have to catch it at just the right time. The reason behind Maldivian beaches glowing in the dark at night isn't a mystery, but it doesn't make them any less impressive. It happens thanks to the bioluminescent plankton. These tiny creatures are like little underwater disco balls, emitting a cool blue glow when they are agitated or on the move. Imagine walking along the shoreline and leaving behind glowing footprints. You can even take a night swim amongst these magical plankton. Researchers have discovered that their bioluminescence is actually a clever defense mechanism against predators. When these microorganisms flash their little blue lights, it disorients and surprises their attackers. The plankton produces this light using a chemical called luciferin. These enchanting plankton can appear at any time of the year. The best chances of seeing them in all their glowing glory are from June to December. During this period, there's a higher volume of plankton in the seas of the Maldives, creating the perfect conditions for a luminous show after the sun sets and the night sky takes over. You'll only witness the magic of bioluminescent plankton when tidal currents bring them close to the shore in large numbers. It's hard to predict exactly when this spectacular show will happen, so make sure to do your research and prepare to take photos with a high ISO to capture it, exactly like it looks in travel catalogs.
So, a mysterious discovery was made deep in the Red Sea, the so-called death pools. Woo, that's scary. In 2020, researchers embarked on a dive into the Red Sea. The mission spot was in the Gulf of Aqaba, between Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Near the end of their expedition, as they ventured deeper into the darkening waters, they noticed some strange seaweed floating above the seafloor. They decided to use a remotely operated vehicle and investigate it. Suddenly, they discovered these strange, motionless lakes of water within the sea. These are called brine pools. They're basically pockets of salty water deep on the ocean floor. And when I say salty, I mean it. Sometimes they're up to 8 times saltier than the ocean water itself. Mysteriously, they don't mix well with the surroundings. They formed millions of years ago, sometime during the Miocene epoch, back when weird creatures roamed the earth, like me, and deeply buried mineral deposits dissolved into the water. The largest pool spans about 170,000 square feet. Meanwhile, 3 smaller ones are under 107 square feet each. At first, this discovery didn't seem that scary. But here's why they're so horrifying. Not only are they disgustingly salty, they also lack oxygen. Now hold on a sec, isn't that normal for something that's underwater? Well, it turns out the Earth's waters are full of oxygen, and at least half of this element on our planet comes from the oceans. Just like plants on land, marine plants, such as phytoplankton, seaweed, and algae, munch on sunlight and produce oxygen through photosynthesis. They release lots of it into the surroundings. Marine life then eats half of it, so only about a quarter of the oxygen that we breathe actually comes from the oceans. Just like us, sea creatures need this element to survive. Without it, they can't breathe and support their metabolism to live. That's why these pools are super dangerous for most of them. It's like a puddle of thick syrup for bugs. When they get in, the poor things immediately suffocate and pass away. Which is why the pools are surrounded by a graveyard of marine animals. But let's see how these things can exist in the first place. Have you ever tried making ice cubes from salty water? Spoiler, it's pretty hard. When you add salt, the water gets harder than usual to freeze, a phenomenon that has a funny name, freezing point depression. Oh, that's because salt interferes with the hydrogen bonds between water molecules. As it finally freezes, stuff like particles, dirt, or dissolved salts get pushed out to the sides. As a result, The salt's kind of squeezed out of the ice crystals and gets trapped near the edges in small bubbles or pockets. Something similar happens in the ocean when seawater starts freezing under super cold polar caps. The salt doesn't freeze with the water. Instead, it gets pushed out, forming a super salty cold liquid, the brine. And then it sinks down to the ocean floor. On a large scale, all this process also helps currents to form. Despite being so dangerous, the pools are still full of microbial life because microbes couldn't care less, they'll survive anywhere. There are literally thick mats of them in the brines. There are also some salt-loving creatures, like shrimps and eels, hovering around the pool's edges. They're being super creepy, waiting to catch unsuspecting prey that ventures too close to the toxic death pool. Ew. Well, it sounds icky, I know. But this discovery gives us some fascinating insights into how life might have originated on Earth. We already know from the evolution theory that we came from the ocean, but now scientists think that life might have begun in the deep sea in some super dark, oxygen-free places. These brine pools are like time capsules. They're one of the closest things we found to the early Earth. They can tell us the planet's history of earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and more. For example, they have some traces of rainfall that happened over 1,000 years ago. And they can also help us search for life on other water-rich planets. For example, Mars most likely used to have huge oceans on it. Now, NASA scientists want to send a special instrument called HABIT for a special red planet mission to study things similar to our brine pools. This will tell us more about how life appears and survives in the universe. There is lots of unexplored fascinating stuff like this in the Red Sea. That's why scientists conducted the so-called Decade Expedition and spent around 5 months exploring the place. This expedition was launched by the National Center for Wildlife. They made so many remarkable discoveries that now we've got 77 new research papers. For example, they found over 10 blue holes, incredible underwater sinkholes that host unique ecosystems. They also learned that dolphins can use those blue holes to protect their young from predators. Scientists also found traces of great white sharks, a creepy community of deep-sea lanternfish living in low oxygen conditions, and even a new coral species. It's the most resilient deep-sea corals that also vibe just fine without oxygen, like microbes we mentioned. Speaking of which, research also showed us some new ancient thermal vents and large blobs of microbial formations near Farasand Island. Now, can you believe that with all that, we only explored 5% of the ocean? It's divided into several layers based on depth. Each layer becomes darker and more isolated from sunlight as we go deeper. The places that no sunlight can reach are terrifying. Now, the fun, cute layer with dolphins and turtles is called the epipelagic, or sunlight zone. It's so tiny, but even this layer is about 650 feet deep. Then we have the mesopelagic, or twilight zone. It's the layer of mysterious octopus, shark, and other loners, which extend to about 3,000 feet down. And then the horrors begin after this one. We encounter the bathopelagic, or midnight zone. It extends to 13,000 feet below the surface, about a half of Everest above you. Here we have the famous poor blobfish, squids, and anglerfish. Below it is the abyssal zone. It extends to about 20,000 feet deep. Since there's not much sunlight or oxygen, as we mentioned, most creatures here are quite small, like tube worms and shrimp. The darkness continues until we arrive at the scariest place of the planet, the place full of trenches formed by tectonic plate movements, the Hadal Zone. It's named after Hades, the deity of the underworld in Greek mythology. Just like Hades' realm is dark, remote, and guarded, the Hadal Zone is the deepest and most depressing part of the ocean. It starts at depths of around 20,000 feet and can go down to 36,000 feet and more. The famous Mariana Trench also belongs to this zone. Only 3 people in history have ever explored these depths in person, making it one of the least explored and most mysterious places on our planet. However, despite crazy high pressure, near freezing temperatures, and complete darkness, there are still things who manage to survive here. Guys like amphipods, which are critters who feed on dead material sinking from above, and the Hadal snailfish, which lives as deep as 27,000 feet. So scientists used to assume that if there's no sunlight, there wouldn't be that much oxygen around. But one day, a research team decided to measure the levels of oxygen in one of those deep zones. Surprisingly, the levels were super high. They checked the equipment thinking that it was malfunctioning. But nope, all the sensors showed the same thing. Turns out the oxygen was somehow generated by rocks. These small potato-sized rocks on the seafloor are called polymetallic nodules. They're rich in metals like copper, nickel, and cobalt, and they're basically like small batteries. When you put a battery in salt water, it can produce bubbles of gas, a process called electrolysis. In the same way, these rocks create tiny electric currents, which are powerful enough to produce the same gases, splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. It's the first time we saw oxygen being produced by some non-living minerals. This is what scientists now call dark oxygen. It turned out that about half of large marine species, or megafauna, were living just on dark oxygen alone. All these discoveries are reshaping our understanding of where and how life could evolve. It means that we might be able to find life on other planets or satellites with low oxygen conditions, like Enceladus and Europa, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and they have large bodies of frozen water on them. Wow! Well, we've been miscalling Uranus all this time. Actually, astronomers say we should be pronouncing it like Uranus, not Uranus. I can't say a different stress changes much, though. However, things could have been different. Initially, Uranus was supposed to have the majestic king-like name of George, because astronomers wanted to name it after King George III. In the end, they changed their minds, and now, well, it's the punchline of every joke. If you take the total cost of launching a mission and divide it by the weight of the cargo, you'll see some pretty mind-blowing figures. According to specialists, back in 2016, it used to cost $10,000 to send just 1 pound of cargo into space. But now, prices have gone through the roof. Cygnus spacecraft's cargo costs over $43,000 per pound, while SpaceX's new carriers come in at around $27,000 per pound. Remember how hard it is to pay $5 for water at airports? Now, a bottle of water in space would cost somewhere between $9,000 and $43,000, and that's only to have it delivered in space. Now, as for water in space, well, it used to be considered a super rare thing. But in reality, there's water ice all over our solar system, so you don't have to buy those overpriced $43K water bottles. It's hanging out there in comets, asteroids, and even in hard-to-see craters on Mercury and the Moon. We're not sure if there's enough water in these places to support colonies of people, though. Mars also has ice at its poles, hiding under the surface dust and frost. Even smaller celestial bodies, like Saturn's moon Enceladus and dwarf planet Ceres, have ice. NASA scientists think there might be a chance of finding life on Jupiter's moon Europa. There might be liquid water beneath its icy shell. Europa, even though it's a lot smaller than Earth, might have an ocean deep enough to hold twice as much water as all the oceans on our planet combined. In 2009, scientists exploring a massive cloud of dust and gas in the center of our galaxy stumbled upon a fascinating surprise. They found ethyl formate within the cloud. This chemical is responsible for the delightful flavor of raspberries and has a rum-like scent. Furthermore, another nearby region is brimming with ethyl alcohol, the same type found in many beverages. In fact, there is enough alcohol in this region to provide every person on Earth with 300,000 pints of beer every day for the next billion years. Now, believe it or not, we do have a black hole on Earth. The thing is, creating an in-lab black hole was a sort of indispensable thing to do. Studying black holes in real space remains a distant dream, so it was only possible to create one to experiment with in a lab. A group of scientists in the Netherlands wanted to explore the mysterious Hawking radiation theory proposed by the iconic Stephen Hawking. Using atoms to mimic an event horizon, they orchestrated electrons, causing a surge in temperature that resembled flat spacetime. As particles moved through quantum fluctuations, a ring of infrared radiation appeared around the lab-grown black hole, mirroring Hawking's idea. So, if you totally understood what I just said, could you please explain it to me? Now, it may sound insane, but you can totally be allergic to the moon. Long story short, it was the final Apollo mission, and they brought back more rock samples than ever before. Plus, they had the first and only pro-scientist on the moon, Jack Schmitt. He was a geologist, and his rock samples helped scientists learn more about the moon's magnetic field and volcanic history. During the expeditions, it became evident that Jack Schmitt was allergic to moon dust. The gritty, sticky powder clung to his suit and his skin, causing irritation in his sinuses, nose, eyes, and throat for a couple of hours after he took his helmet off. Meanwhile, neutron stars are extremely dense, being basically just a bunch of neutrons squished into a super small space. If you had just a teaspoonful of this stuff, it would weigh more than the entire human population combined. And to match the density of a neutron star, we'd all have to squeeze into the space the size of a sugar cube. No thanks. When it comes to outer space, we tend to think that Earth and the Moon are pretty close together. But in reality, you can actually squeeze all the other planets of our solar system between Earth and the Moon. The average distance between them is about 240,000 miles. If you added up the diameters of the 7 planets, you'd still have some room to spare, about 5,000 miles. In 2011, scientists made a groundbreaking discovery of a massive reservoir of water in space. This water, equivalent to 140 trillion times all the water in Earth's oceans, could provide each person on our planet with a planet's worth of water 20,000 times over. This reservoir was located near a massive black hole drawing in matter and emitting energy, known as a quasar. The water was formed by energy waves colliding hydrogen and oxygen atoms together, and it was found around 12 billion light-years away. So, when the Curiosity Mars rover snapped its very first sunset picture in 2015, scientists were practically doing backflips from excitement. Turns out, sunsets on the red planet are anything but red. They're actually a stunning shade of blue. According to NASA, the reason behind this phenomenon is that the dust in Mars' atmosphere is like a magical filter that lets blue light shine through while blocking out those warm tones like yellow, orange, and red. Well, Venus is a slow spinner compared to Earth. It takes this planet 243 days to make a full rotation, and it spins in the opposite direction. But even though Venus takes longer to spin around, it zooms around the Sun in just 225 days because it's located so close. So, believe it or not, a year on Venus is actually shorter than its day. So, you might think that the night sky should be full of stars with no dark spaces at all. This idea is known as Olbers' paradox, named after German astronomer Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers. He thought that if the universe was infinite, unchanging, and timeless, then we should see stars everywhere we look. But it turns out that the universe is not infinite, unchanging, or timeless. Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe is actually expanding, and the leftover radiation from the Big Bang tells us that the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. Think of all the birthday candles. Ooh! So, the reason we don't see stars in every direction is because some stars are just too far away, or they haven't been around long enough for their light to travel all the way to us. During the Apollo 16 lunar mission, Ken Mattingly, the command module pilot, had a bit of a scare when he realized his wedding ring was missing. The whole crew frantically searched the spacecraft for it, but no luck. Finally, on day 9, while Mattingly was on a spacewalk, the ring was spotted floating out the hatch door. Charles Duke Jr. tried to grab it but missed. Luckily, it bounced off Mattingly's helmet into Duke's hands. It's cool they found the ring, but there are many other things people left up there. There's even a toothbrush floating around somewhere. Mercury is already the tiniest planet in our solar system, not counting Pluto, of course, and the second densest after Earth. And believe it or not, it's actually shrinking and getting denser. For a long time, scientists thought Earth was the only planet with tectonic activity. But that all changed when the Messenger spacecraft flew by Mercury, giving us a detailed scan of the whole planet. In 2016, Messenger discovered these cool cliff-like formations called fault scarps. Since they're still relatively small, scientists think they're pretty new, suggesting that Mercury is still contracting 4.5 billion years after the solar system began. And around 10 years ago, Australian astronaut Luca Parmitano went through a near-drowning experience during his spacewalk due to a water leak that went unaddressed. Nobody knew how it happened and why Luca ended up having water in his helmet. NASA was investigating the issue for months, but they were unable to determine the exact cause of the water entering Luca's helmet.
You're flying over the Sahara Desert in a small, light aircraft when you spot something truly weird. It seems to belong to a very different part of the world, the ocean. But what ocean can be huge enough for this monstrous sea star to dwell there? You descend and realize that it's not a sea star. It's a towering dune with a pretty unique shape, and it's not alone. From afar, these magnificent sand structures look a bit like pyramids. They have pointed tops and radiating arms. Called star dunes, they're the most complex and largest desert dunes in the world. They're the tallest of their kind, but that's not the coolest thing about them. Researchers have found similar formations on Mars and even on one of Saturn's moons, Titan. Star dunes aren't super rare, but they're especially widespread in southeastern Morocco near the border with Algeria. That's where you're flying at the moment, and the breathtaking dune you're marveling at is Lella Lalia, probably the most famous of them all, a giant 330 feet tall. Scientists believe that it formed in less than 1,000 years. How about doing some research to find out more about these unusual formations? There, I see a great spot for landing. Star dunes got their name because of their multi-armed shapes. They form in areas where winds change direction throughout the year. But even though you can find them in different places on our planet, there is just one confirmed star dune in the rock record, the collective record of Earth's development reflected in preserved rocks. The star dune in question is in Scotland, and it's ancient, from about 250 million years ago. That's all we know about super old star dunes. Probably because we don't know what to look for to identify one. Another problem: star dunes often form in remote locations, which makes them extremely difficult to study. Imagine reaching the nearest settlement, then somehow traveling who knows how many miles to the dune itself, and then slogging up several hundred feet of shifting sand. I'll pass. But you can go since you've already landed, and the dune is right here in front of you. Currently, you're in a dune field called Erdstall. Lucky for you, this area has long become a popular tourist stop. Look, in the distance, there are hotels and even a good road. Scientists who examined Lella Lalia before you used ground-penetrating radar to find out more about the sand formation. This equipment can detect the tiniest differences in sand grain sizes and water content under the surface of the dune. That's how you can create a picture of its interior layers. Look out! Phew, it was a close call. See this trench? The researchers dug such trenches to take samples of long-buried sands and then examined them. It's a pretty cool process. The thing is, while buried deep inside, the quartz in the sand accumulates radiation coming from natural sources within our planet. We can compare the grains of quartz to minuscule rechargeable batteries. They can store the energy they get from radiation. When researchers bring them to the laboratory, they can make the grains release that energy, which comes out in the form of light. Scientists can measure the brightness and say when the sand enjoyed sunlight for the last time. Now, when those experts who dug the trenches looked inside Lella Lalia, they were shocked. The enormous formation turned out to be very young, for a dune, of course. You'd expect a dune that is several hundred feet tall to be pretty old, like thousands or tens of thousands of years. But that wasn't the case. Well, at least not entirely. The upper part of the dune has turned 900 just recently. But look at the sand near the base of the dune. Yep, right there. Well, it was buried there around 12 or 13,000 years ago, representing ancient dunes in the area. Those good old dunes were active for a couple thousand years, and then something went wrong. Because for a whopping 8,000 years, the sand wasn't accumulating there. A mystery? Scientists might have an explanation. You see, the first part of this quiet period occurred during the time when the climate became warm and wet. Yep, even in the Sahara. It happened about 11,700 years ago. It was the end of the last ice age and the beginning of a new era, the Holocene. And guess what? The Sahara went green. It started blooming like your local botanic garden. Plants started popping up all over the place, stabilizing the sand. If you had visited the Sahara during that period, you wouldn't have recognized this place. But you would have likely come across humans wandering marshy landscapes and hunting for food. Researchers have found pottery fragments and stone tools on one side of Lelalalia. That's true. As sand dunes form and then shift throughout their lives, they swallow and protect ancient remnants of life. Just dig well enough and you might find something that will provide you with a window into the past. It can be ancient fossils, anything from fossilized shells and corals to prehistoric plants. Those can offer precious insights into the history of our planet and the living beings once inhabiting certain regions. Now, it might come as a shock, but in the Sahara Desert, scientists have uncovered well-preserved marine reptiles and fossilized fish within the layers of those ancient sand dunes. They are the remains from the time when the Sahara was covered with a sea millions of years ago. Anyway, it's time to leave that ancient paradise if you want to survive. 4,000 years ago, the wet period came to an end, and the Sahara dried out again. Interestingly, our dune didn't begin building up right away. For some time, sand probably blew through but didn't accumulate. Or the dune could have started growing in a different location. And it's a valid theory since scientists have discovered recently that Lelalalia shifts around 1.6 feet every year. It also accumulates about 6,400 tons of sand every year. Now, if you've been inspired by your dune trip and are now eager to explore more of them, I've got some unpleasant news for you. Unfortunately, although there might be star dunes locked in sandstones around the globe, they're super tricky to detect. The problem is, dunes are huge, but they lack a single distinguishing feature. So you'd really need large exposed beds of rock if you want to get a wide enough view to identify a star dune. On the bright side, there surely are places where it might be possible to do such research, but you should be ready to know that it might be just a set of various features that look like other dunes. But if you combine them, you'll say, it's likely to be a star dune. Comment below if you'd like to go on a trip in search of a star dune. Meanwhile, we'll continue our journey. You decide to have some rest and start climbing down the side of the dune. That's when you begin hearing it. Terrible, haunting sounds. Are there ghosts nearby? Worry not, you're safe. You might have heard of a phenomenon called singing sands. As you walk down some sandy slopes, you disturb the grains of sand. They rub against each other, producing friction that creates those eerie melodies. With each step, the sand beneath your feet comes alive in a ghostly choir of whistles and whispers. The sounds range from low hums to loud, high-pitched wails, as if an otherworldly symphony is echoing through the dunes. But of course, scientists have their own very practical explanation, attributing this phenomenon to the right atmospheric conditions combined with the unique size, shape, and moisture content of the grains. Now you've almost made it all the way to the bottom of the dune, but beware of slip faces. When a sand dune reaches a certain steepness, it develops a slope. That's the very slip face I was talking about. This slope is usually on the leeward side of the dune and sheltered from the prevailing wind. Sand grains start accumulating on the windward side, slowly creeping along the dune's gentle slope. At one point, they reach the top. Gravity takes over and they start sliding down, triggering a cascading effect. It looks like a miniature sand avalanche, and I wouldn't want to end up in its way. The latest super eruption of Yellowstone occurred 640,000 years ago, and it was long before Homo sapiens saw the light of day. But we were around during another, no less devastating natural disaster. This super eruption took place on the island of Sumatra around 74,000 years ago. That's when an erupting supervolcano wreaked havoc on huge territories, sending up plumes of debris and ash that spread for thousands of miles and caused temperatures on the planet to plummet. The effects of this super eruption were visible as far away as southern Africa. Experts believe they could have impacted early humans there. By the time the volcano erupted, our ancestors had already been using stone tools and had likely known how to produce yarn. And some specialists even think that the Toba super eruption was so powerful it could push our ancestors to the brink of extinction. They claim that Toba might be the largest volcanic eruption to occur on Earth within the last 2 million years. The eruption disgorged so much pyroclastic rock it would be enough to cover the entire United States to the depth of a one-story house. About a third of that deposit piled up on northern Sumatra, while a lot more ended up beneath the floor of the Indian Ocean. The super eruption left an elliptical crater lake around 60 miles long. The caldera is so large it's hard to feel that you're indeed in a volcano. Pumice deposits from the eruption remain in the canyon walls and go deep below the ground. There aren't many arguments about the amount of pumice and ash involved in this disaster. At the same time, experts aren't sure how much sulfur ended up in the atmosphere. Even some sulfur layers in the polar ice could be potential candidates, but so far, scientists haven't found any connection between them and Toba. But let's get back to the dramatic impact the super eruption had on early humans. It turns out some not only survived but even thrived after this natural catastrophe, at least judging by the artifacts they made during and after the eruption. The disaster might not have posed a serious threat to those of our ancestors who took refuge along the coast. Genetic evidence hints that modern humans descend from a few thousand people that ventured out of Africa around 60,000 years ago. Why just a few thousand? According to some experts, the rest of our ancestors could have been devastated by the Toba eruption. After all, the supervolcano spewed out 1,000 cubic miles of dust and rock in a flash, leaving a scar in the ground that was dozens of miles wide. All that dust and sulfur Toba sent into the atmosphere potentially cooled the surface of our planet, which led to the appearance of glaciers and the lowering of Earth's sea levels. And since Toba might have had an important role in shaping humankind, scientists have been working hard trying to understand precisely how early humans reacted to this disaster. In 2011, several researchers found an enigmatic soil sample in South Africa's Pinnacle Point, an archaeological site overlooking the Indian Ocean. This sample contained some volcanic ash. After examining the layer, they found more than 400,000 artifacts left by early humans. Those ranged from heat-treated stone tools to signs of fire and animal bones. Based on this finding, the team suggested that early humans on the South African coast thrived after the eruption, living in that area for thousands of years and improving their tools. The region might have served as a refuge during and after the Toba eruption. A 2009 study suggested that the eruption could have lowered global temperatures by 14 degrees Fahrenheit. It would have made survival tough elsewhere in Africa. If there had been a volcanic winter, it wouldn't have been as cold along the coastline. On the other hand, newer studies claim that Toba spewed out so much sulfur into the atmosphere that the resulting aerosols could have stuck together, which would have limited their cooling effect in the long term. In other words, right after the eruption, temperatures would have plummeted, but only in some regions. And after 3 years or so, the effects of the eruptions would have calmed down altogether, becoming not dangerous to humans. Well, apparently, more research is needed. Meanwhile, let's figure out if we should watch out for any volcanoes these days. Last year, thousands of small earthquakes shook the ground near Iceland's Svartsengi geothermal power plant. Magma rose to the surface there, and now it has opened wide fractures slicing through the small town of Grindavik. The ground there is still swelling, and an eruption might happen with little notice. But of course, that's not all. Over the planet, 45 other volcanoes keep rumbling. For example, Italy's Vesuvius, that infamous thing that finished the city of Pompeii in 79 CE. Over the last 17,000 years, the volcano has experienced 8 explosive eruptions, followed by powerful pyroclastic flows. Dense masses of super hot ash, lava fragments, and gases flowing at high speeds. The volcano's last eruption happened in 1944. Mount Rainier is one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the USA. Its high elevation, chemical composition, and proximity to Washington's Seattle and Tacoma suburbs, and the volcano's ability to produce massive pyroclastic flows make Mount Rainier a threat to consider. The heat from this volcano could potentially melt the ice and snow covering it, leading to rapid downstream flows of debris, mud, and rocks. The Novarupta volcano in Alaska's Katmai National Park and Reserve formed in a 1912 eruption, which was the world's largest in the 20th century. The volcano sent almost 7 cubic miles of ash and debris into the air. It also produced such a powerful ash flow that it created the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. Mount Pinatubo is located in a populated region in the Philippines. It became notorious after a 1991 massive eruption, which was the second largest eruption of the 20th century. More than 700 people lost their lives during that natural disaster. Today, more than 21 million people live within 62 miles of Pinatubo. Mount Agun, a continuously erupting volcano in Indonesia, had its last major eruption in 1963. It was one of the most tragic eruptions in the country's history. It lasted for 11 months, producing ashfall and pyroclastic flows that led to the loss of more than 1,000 lives and serious property damage. People saw ash plumes above the volcano throughout 2018, following the eruption in November 2017. Japan's Mount Fuji hasn't erupted since 1707. That year, a massive earthquake likely set it off. In 2014, experts warned that Fuji could be at risk of another eruption following the 9-magnitude earthquake that shook Japan in 2011. Experts believed the earthquake had raised pressure below Fuji. The eruption in 1707 sent so much ash and debris into the air that all this mass even reached Tokyo. Should Fuji erupt again, it would affect more than 25 million people in the surrounding areas. The eruption of Washington's Mount St. Helens in 1980 was one of the most destructive volcanic events in U.S. history. 57 people, as well as thousands of animals, lost their lives during that natural disaster. The eruption also destroyed around 200 square miles of forest. Experts think that Mount St. Helens' history of massive eruptions means that future catastrophes are bound to happen. The next explosive eruption might send large amounts of ash all over the Pacific Northwest. No wonder the volcano is under close monitoring. One of Indonesia's most active volcanoes, Mount Merapi, has been erupting for centuries. NASA claims that the biggest risk of this volcano is pyroclastic flows, which can spread over vast areas and harm loads of people. For the last time, Merapi erupted in January 2024, sending plumes of smoke into the air. These days, more than 24 million people live in the area surrounding this volcano.
The surface of this river looks as if it's covered with fish scales. Is it a giant water dragon or some other ancient monster? Not really. The explanation is much more boring, but surprising at the same time. Now let's start from the very beginning. This is the Shantung River in China, and this is Hangzhou Bay, its estuary, which is the tidal mouth of a river, where the tide meets the stream itself. Now this area is home to the world's largest tidal bores. A tidal bore is a strong tide that pushes up the river against the current. In the Shantung River, such tidal bores can reach a whopping 29 feet. The area regularly sees trains of large waves moving upstream. But in 2021, during a scientific expedition, experts discovered a marvelous natural phenomenon unique to this area. Sometimes, the tide comes in swirling waves. That's the famous fish scale tide. Thing is, this region has rotating currents, which means that the tide doesn't just move inland and then simply reverses its direction. Instead, a rotating current easily changes direction without changing its speed. This makes the Shantung River perfect for winding up with groups of waves crashing into one another at oblique angles, which is like a cross sea. Let's speak about this phenomenon now. These four-sided wave patterns in the ocean look mesmerizing, as if the ocean deities decided to play a round of giant chess. But what you observe is the phenomenon known as square waves. They're often called cross-sea and grid waves too. The thing is, most waves reach the shore and break parallel to the coastline. But in some regions of the world, these waves create a chessboard-like pattern on the surface of the water. When you look at these waves from above, you might think there's an underwater grid forming square-shaped ripples. But square waves aren't caused by anything taking place beneath the surface of the water. They're the result of the way the water moves. Weather patterns in certain regions make waves form at different angles. When two opposing swells crash, we've got this unique pattern on our hands. However beautiful and unusual this natural phenomenon is, it's also extremely dangerous. If you spot square waves while swimming, get out of the water immediately. Square waves usually come hand in hand with rip currents, incredibly strong currents flowing seaward from the shore. Plus, square waves can reach 10 feet in height, and that's not something even an experienced swimmer can deal with. So, we're done with the seas for the moment and are moving to the largest active volcano in Europe. It's Etna, and it continues to amaze us with jaw-dropping smoke ring shows. But wait, people live there. Isn't it time to evacuate them? The volcano looks like it's about to go off. Well, let's calm down. There's no need to fuss. Experts assure us that the production of such rings doesn't mean that a big eruption is on the way. These white smoke rings are made of water vapor and are generated by bursts of gas bubbles inside a narrow duct over a magma chamber. Etna was even nicknamed the Lady of the Ring, and currently the volcano is breaking its own records. For example, in the year 2000, the volcano produced around 5,000 such smoke rings. According to researchers, no other volcano on Earth produces as many volcanic vortex rings as Etna. Southeast Crater is especially active. It emits countless beautiful vapor rings. Now, don't look away from the sky. You might witness something like what the residents of New Jersey saw recently. A massive fireball lit up the sky in the Garden State and surrounding areas. A meteor falling to the ground looked like a bright streak of light, and the folks of several New Jersey towns, as well as some parts of New York, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut, reported this show to the American Meteor Society. Security camera footage posted online by some witnesses of this awesome phenomenon show the flash dash across the sky within a couple of seconds at 3:43 a.m. Another unbelievable phenomenon captured recently is one of the rarest in the world and almost impossible to see with the unaided eye. A West Australian photographer was shooting a wet season thunderstorm just outside of Derby when he managed to film on camera a few red sprites. He said later that they were gone in the blink of an eye. He described red sprites as huge, feathery tendrils of purple and red and specks of bright red. Red sprites are massive electrical discharges that take different shapes and look like reddish-orange flashes. They last for just fractions of a second and occur after super-strong lightning strokes. Even though they're usually caused by the lightning discharges between a thundercloud and the ground, sprites soar up into the air, up to 60 miles. Interestingly, this phenomenon had been dismissed and considered to be fiction for decades, until scientists finally caught it on film. Since that time, red sprites have been recorded regularly. Catatumbo lightning is the world's longest lightning storm. The heart of the storm, which repeats every year, is over the mouth of the Catatumbo River, where it empties into Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela. This storm towers higher than a regular one. Catatumbo lightning occurs for 140 to 160 nights a year, lasts for 9 hours a day, and produces 16 to 40 lightning flashes per minute. Maybe you've heard of how they say lightning doesn't strike the same place twice? Well, Catatumbo doesn't seem to know about this rule. Or at least, it doesn't prevent storm clouds from gathering in the very same place year after year. A fellow hill walking in the UK has captured amazing shots of a weather phenomenon that was called an angel in the sky. So look at it. This scene was captured with a Canon 5D Mark IV camera. The silhouette, though, isn't some non-material thing. It's just the shadow of the photographer at the center of a circular rainbow. Mesmerized, the photographer took a few more photos and continued walking. Such an effect is produced when an observer stands above the upper surface of a cloud. It can also be a mountain or some other high ground, and the sun should be shining from behind their back. When the observer sees their shadow, the light is reflected in such a way that a bizarre circular glory appears around the point directly opposite the sun. Another cool sky phenomenon was witnessed in Auckland. Look at this. What does it remind you of? I bet you think it looks like a spaceship from a different civilization, but it's just a rare meteorological phenomenon. Everyone who saw the circular cloud formation said it looked like a hole in the cloud cover, and some also added that a small rainbow was visible inside. This phenomenon is known as a fall streak hole and a punch hole cloud. Such a formation is quite rare. Even experts have seen it just a few times throughout their careers. What happens here is some sort of atmospheric disturbance within supercooled water, the disturbance being an airplane or something similar. As a result, the supercooled water rapidly turns into ice crystals. Since the crystals are heavier than the surrounding cloud, they fall out, leaving a hole behind. The process happens high up in the atmosphere and is quick. It takes only minutes or so. Well, let's get back to the ground and examine the phenomenon people in the US can witness. It's an extremely rare one. Nothing similar has happened like this since 1803. What is it? Billions of cicadas from two different broods are merging together from the underground after more than 200 years. All these loud singing insects belong to two distinct families of periodical cicadas. One group emerges to the surface every 13 years, and the other every 17 years. It's a rare occurrence when the cycles of both groups align. This year, this once-in-a-lifetime event is taking place since two groups with different cycles are emerging at the same time. These broods are known as Brood 13 and Brood 19. They have been seen and heard across the southern U.S. and as far north as Illinois.
Back in the day, from 774 to 775, Earth got hit with a mega blast of radiation. This crazy burst of energy left its mark. 3 rings from that year show way too high levels of radioactive stuff. But what exactly caused it? Scientists are inclined to think that the reason was a solar flare. Some folks think maybe a massive supernova caused the radiation blast. But astronomer Phil Plait says that if that had been the case, it would have had to be less than 1,000 light years away and would have been crazy bright. But there's no record of that happening. No bright, shiny Death Star in sight. After looking at the radioactive carbon and beryllium in tree rings, scientists ruled out a bunch of other possibilities. At first, they considered that it was a smash-up between neutron stars or a neutron star and a black hole. These types of crashes produce a super quick blast of gamma rays without any light show, which lines up best with the evidence. But these kinds of collisions are super rare. Plait thinks it's kinda unlikely that this is the answer. He figures we should only see one of these events in our galaxy about once every million years. So having one just 1,200 years ago seems pretty wild. Scientists are seriously worried about these rare events. If one happened closer to Earth, it could seriously mess up life on our planet. Even if it was thousands of light years away, a similar event today could cause chaos with all the fancy electronic systems we've come to rely on. So it's a good thing those gamma ray bursts are so rare, because if they were more common, Earth might be in for a rough ride. You may think that if our planet could withstand mega radiation blasts, it can easily withstand something less frightening. Let's say grasshoppers. Sorry to say that, but it's not exactly true. Back in 1874, during a hot summer in Kansas, things took a strange turn. Grasshoppers, or should I say locusts, invaded the Great Plains like nobody's business. They came down like a storm, blanketing houses, trees, and even poor trains passing by. These bugs were on a mission to cause chaos. Farmers had to scramble to protect their wells and just about anything else worth saving. Locusts landed everywhere, wreaking havoc on everything in sight. Even poor sheep lost their wool. Locusts even stripped paint off wagons and handles off pitchforks. This is how destructive they were. Livestock tried to fight back by eating them, but there were just too many of these insects. That year, those critters caused about $200 million in crop damage. The locust invasion was so tough, even the US Army stepped in to help. In the end, locusts began to disappear, sparing the plains from further devastation. Natural disasters can be even more unexpected than radiation blasts from space and locust invasions. Check this out. Back in June 2017, a reindeer herder up in northwest Siberia was minding their own business when they suddenly heard a crazy loud blast and saw smoke shooting up from the ground. If that happened to me, I'd need to change my pants. Sorry. Later on, they found this huge hole that was like 23 feet wide and nearly 65 feet deep and was surrounded by chunks of ice and dirt. It turned out that there were over 17 such black holes in the area. They were filled with peaty water and shrouded in mystery. Some folks thought those were sinkholes. Others were sure they were left by top-secret device tests or even a bunch of meteorites. Now, the latest idea is that these holes are actually craters caused by the Arctic warming up and melting the frozen ground. The theory states that as the ground thaws, gas pockets trapped beneath the surface burst through, creating such dramatic holes. Apparently, these eerie craters have been showing up in specific spots in Siberia where ancient geological faults have been leaking out hot natural gas for ages. Combine that with some leftover methane from old lake sediments, and you've got a recipe for some explosive surprises as the planet heats up. Not scared yet? Alright, maybe you're afraid of darkness, huh? If so, you wouldn't like it back in 536. It's the year when the world went through a crazy 18-month period of darkness. A mysterious fog covered Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, blocking out the sun and causing chaos. It was like the Dark Ages, but for real. It turns out that the main culprit behind this fog was a volcanic eruption in Iceland. This eruption spread ash across the northern hemisphere, causing temperatures to drop and crops to fail. People were freezing and starving. It was a mess. Historians from back in the day even talked about how weird it was. The sun looked like the moon. Summers were freezing cold, and even China had summer snow. It was all because of the volcanic ash blocking out the sun. And to make things even worse, this period of darkness sparked the beginning of the bubonic plague in 541. Talk about a rough time to be alive. Let's go back to Siberia real quick. Back in 1908, way out in the wilds of Siberia, an asteroid dropped for an unexpected visit. Today, we know it as the Tunguska asteroid, but it didn't get its name instantly. Local folks only caught a glimpse of the show. A bright fireball streaking across the sky, followed by a massive boom. Trees went flying, fires blazed, and animals weren't too happy about it either. But since the area was so remote, not many folks took notice. For almost 2 decades, nobody bothered to check out the Tunguska site. People had too much on their plates back then. But then, scientists finally made it out there and found evidence of the asteroid's shenanigans. Later in expeditions, they found some spacey microparticles. Fast forward to now, and NASA has a whole planetary defense thing going on. They even sent a mission to test out asteroid deflecting tech. Because who knows when the next cosmic rock will come knocking on our door, right? In the middle of the 19th century, there was one more epic solar storm called the Carrington Event. It may not sound like a big deal to you, but it had pretty rough consequences. The next day after the storm, Earth was hit with this insane geomagnetic storm that threw telegraphs off the rails and brought auroras to the tropics. And it's the place where they normally never show up. Turns out, all this space weather madness started with weird stuff happening on the sun's surface, like sunspots. From these spots, solar flares and other crazy electromagnetic stuff can pop out and mess with our technology. Massive solar storms like this one can shoot out from the sun at speeds of up to 1,800 miles per second. They can contain billions of tons of solar material, complete with a sassy little magnetic field that loves to mess with Earth's magnetic field when they meet. Now, listen closely. We're getting close to the next solar maximum in 2025, so it's a good time to check out the history of the worst solar storms, like the Carrington event, and take notice. Imagine if a similar storm hit today. An internet apocalypse, anyone? Businesses would be sent offline and we'd be facing some serious damages. Luckily, these mega solar storms don't happen very often. But hey, space weather is tricky to predict, so who knows when the next one will hit?
So, you want to get as close to the moon as possible without leaving Earth? Easy. Hop on a plane to Ecuador and climb Mount Chimborazo. I know, it may sound weird, but hear me out. Now, Everest is the tallest mountain when you're measuring from sea level, but Chimborazo's peak is actually the closest spot on Earth to the moon. Here's the physics behind it. Mount Everest is over 29,000 feet tall, and Chimborazo is only around 20,000 feet. But the secret lies in how far they are from the Earth's core. You see, Earth is not a perfect sphere. It's chubby in the middle and slightly squished at the top and the bottom. The chubby part in the middle is called the equator. FYI, the country Ecuador actually translates to equator in Spanish. Now you know. The mountain we're talking about, Chimborazo, is located a few degrees from the equator line. So since the squishy sphere is chubbier in the middle part, Chimborazo's peak sticks out farther into space. This means that if you hike all the way up to this mountain's peak, you'll be a smidge closer to the moon than if you hike all the way up Mount Everest. In the North Sea, off the coast of England, there's a tiny platform bobbing around, roughly the size of 2 tennis courts. You might think it's an oil platform, but this is Sealand, the world's tiniest country. The Ruff's Tower platform was built during the first half of the 20th century as a fort to protect English ships. Jump to the 1960s when a guy named Paddy Roy Bates decided to claim this old fort as his own country, naming it the Principality of Sealand. Paddy gave his country everything it deserved: a national flag, currency, a constitution, stamps, and a hoisting swing system. That's how you get into the country, by the way, hoisted all the way up to the upper part of the platform. Today, this micronation is headed by ruling monarch Michael Bates, who is a member of the country's self-proclaimed royalty. I know, right? Why wait in line for the British throne? The nation has its own fan club, who cheer for the country's national soccer club. Their team competes in international tournaments where they usually play with other tiny nations. Although Sealand only has one official resident as of right now, players from other countries join to help out their soccer team. One of the country's supporters also placed a Sealand flag on top of Mount Everest. Having your kitchen in one country and your living room in another, well, this is the daily reality for some locals in Barle. In this town, the border between Belgium and the Netherlands doesn't just run along streets, it slices right through buildings. So, to navigate this setup, a rule was made that a house's nationality is determined where its front door is located. But this solution created its own problems. There's a house where the front door is exactly on the border, giving it 2 addresses, one in Belgium and one in the Netherlands. The owners of this house were given a unique opportunity. They could choose which country they'd like to get their utilities from, like gas and water. And you guessed it, they picked the country where the stuff was cheaper, in this case, Belgium. Down in Senegal, Africa, there's a lake that looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. About 18 miles north of the capital, Dakar, you'll find Lake Retba, also known as La Rosa. This lake is famous for its bright pink water. Yes, it really is pink, and you can even take a swim if you're up for it. But be prepared, the water is super salty. one of the saltiest lakes in the world with salt levels over 40%. The pink color comes from a species of tiny algae. These algae produce red pigments that reflect sunlight, giving the lake its unique shade. If you want to see the lake at its brightest pink, visit during the dry season from November to June. The rainwater during other times of the year can wash away some of the color. Oh, by the way, there are other pink lakes around the world, like Lake Hillier in Western Australia and Lake Natron in Tanzania. So there's a hill that seems to be on fire all the time. Located in the Arctic region of Canada, the Smoking Hills are a truly unique sight on Earth. Some of the minerals found here are so rare that they've only been spotted on Mars. For at least a couple of hundred years, the ground here has been smoking continuously. At first, explorers thought this was due to an active volcano, but it turns out the smoke comes from something else. The soil in the Smoking Hills contains sulfur and coal, and when these materials mix with oxygen, they can spontaneously catch fire and keep on burning. But don't get any adventurous ideas about visiting. The environment here is extremely harsh, there's toxic smoke, and the temperatures can be dangerously high. So, I'd try Orlando. New Zealand is famous for its stunning landscapes, but it also has a hidden treasure underground. Deep in some caves in the country's North Island, you can find a mesmerizing natural wonder. To see it, you'll need to go down about 150 feet in a series of dark, twisting caves. As you go deeper, you'll enter complete darkness until you reach the cave ceilings, which are lined with tiny glowing creatures. These are New Zealand's native glowworms, which are the larvae of a special type of fungus gnat found only in this country. They shine a bright blue light to attract prey. If you get a chance to tour these caves, it feels like floating through a galaxy, with thousands of these living stars sparkling above and their glow reflecting in the water beneath your boat. It's an incredible sight, like stepping into a magical glowing world. Mexico is home to one of the most amazing caves in the world, called the Cave of Crystals. If you think you've seen big crystals before, wait until you see these. In around 1910, miners in the town of Nica, Chihuahua, like the dog, discovered a cave full of clear selenite crystals. But it wasn't until 90 years later that they found an even more incredible cave filled with enormous crystals, some as long as 39 feet and weighing up to 55 tons. Scientists believe that 26 million years ago, give or take, hot, mineral-rich water filled this cave, allowing these huge crystals to grow. The Nica crystals are thought to be the biggest in the world, making people standing next to them look teeny in comparison. However, exploring the cave isn't easy. Inside, temperatures reach 136 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with protection, people can only stay inside for 20 to 30 minutes. It's an extraordinary place, but not exactly a comfortable one for humans. Mauritius is famous for its beautiful beaches and clear blue waters. But it also has a stunning optical illusion at its southwest corner that looks like an underwater waterfall. Even though it seems like water is flowing down into the ocean, what you're actually seeing is a trick of the light and the seafloor. The island is on an ocean shelf that's only about 500 feet deep, but just beyond the edge, it drops down to 2.5 miles deep. This drop creates the illusion of a waterfall as currents push sand and particles over the edge, making it look like water is cascading down. So, while it's not a real underwater waterfall, it's definitely a cool sight to see from a boat. Now here's a place that might either give you chills or leave you in awe, depending on when you visit. Near the small town of Grafino in Poland, there's a forest of pine trees with a strange twist. They're all bent at their bases. During the day, these trees, with their sharp 90-degree curves, look fascinating and even a bit whimsical. You might even find a comfortable spot to sit on if you're having a picnic. But visit the crooked forest at night, and it takes on a whole different vibe. A thin layer of fog hangs around, making the forest look eerie and a bit spooky. Plus, scientists still don't know why for sure the trees are bent like this. So, would you prefer to see it in the bright light of day? or the mysterious dark of night. Ooh.
It may seem that today, with our quite advanced technological development, science can explain pretty much any natural phenomenon. But that's not always true. Some things still stump experts and make them build exotic theories. Let's have a look at some of such phenomena. Erdstall lights are a puzzling phenomenon you can observe in Erdstall Valley in central Norway. The thing is that some highly unusual lights can often be seen over the valley. They appear mostly at night. The lights are typically white, but they occasionally turn yellowish or reddish. Nobody knows what makes them change color. What's more, the lights can move. And if at one moment they seem to motionlessly hang in midair, the next minute they may travel somewhere at lightning speed. There's no certain place where they appear, and you can't predict the duration of their stay. Despite all the research that has been done since the 1980s, scientists are still unable to explain this phenomenon as well as such weird behavior of lights. The sardine run lasts from May to July. During this time, millions of sardines swim northward along South Africa's east coast. You can probably imagine a feeding frenzy that starts at that time. It's believed that the water temperature must get lower than 70 degrees Fahrenheit for the migration to begin. This mushroom with a difficult name, Corioactis gister, is only found in Japan and Texas, and it makes scientists extremely confused. Why these two locations? It's true that they're on the same latitude, but these places are definitely not the only ones. Plus, they're so far away from each other. After studying the mushroom's DNA in 2004, experts suggested that the two populations might have been separated into two lineages around 19 million years ago. On Central Flores Island, there's a 3,000-foot-high volcano called Kelimutu. At its base, there is a small town. If you want to see the main attraction of the area, you'll most definitely stay there. And the attraction I'm talking about is 3 lakes, known as the Lake of Old People, the Lake of Young Men and Maidens, and the Enchanted Lake. Why are these lakes so popular and attract so many people? They inexplicably change colors. Ancient legends claim that the lakes are the final resting place of human souls, and those souls stay in different lakes according to their actions. As for scientific research, no one has yet conducted any to discover the cause of the changing colors. But theorists suppose that it might be due to underwater volcanic activity. It might be pushing minerals to the lake's surface. Then, depending on what elements those are, the lakes can turn blood red, bright turquoise, or olive green. But the coolest thing? The lakes are never all the same color at the same time. This phenomenon is unique and hasn't been observed anywhere else in the world. Those who have ever heard an annoying noise a kettle makes to inform you the water inside is boiling can imagine what the whistle sounds like. Even though this noise isn't as blood-curdling as some other unexplained sounds, it doesn't make the whistle any less mysterious. It's incredibly elusive. In 1997, only one underwater microphone was able to pick it up. At that time, researchers didn't manage to pinpoint the source of the noise. The most likely cause of the unusual sound is an eruption of one of the submarine volcanoes. But once again, there's not enough proof to make sure. There's probably no person on Earth who doesn't marvel at the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. But not everyone knows that there is another triangle. Not so famous, but just as dangerous. Dragon's Triangle, or the Devil's Sea, lies in the area between Japan and the islands of Bonin. It covers a big part of the Philippine Sea as well. That's why people also call this place the Pacific Bermuda Triangle. Surprisingly, or not really, the Devil's Sea is situated exactly opposite the Bermuda Triangle. Ships and planes tend to disappear here with the same regularity as in the North Atlantic Triangle. People also report seeing ghost ships in the open sea. And while scientists provide logical reasons for the vanishing vessels and aircraft, most people still believe in the paranormal nature of Dragon's Triangle. For the first time, a bizarre sound later called the upsweep was registered in 1991 in the Pacific Ocean. One of the most unusual things about the sound is that it's constantly changing. It varies from high to low frequencies and then back again. You can hear it better in the spring and fall than in the winter and summer. The sound travels from the bottom of the ocean toward its surface. Scientists do have a theory explaining this phenomenon. They think it might be the activity of undersea volcanoes that causes the sound. Hot lava that's pouring into the ice-cold ocean water can theoretically produce such noise. But researchers haven't found any evidence to confirm this theory yet. On the thin Curonian spit splitting the Baltic Sea from the Curonian Lagoon, there is one of the most bizarre places on Earth. Locals call this area the Dancing Forest because pine trees in this forest have shockingly unusual shapes. They twist in spirals and circles along the ground. There are some theories why it could be happening, of course. Some people claim that huge amounts of positive and negative energies once clashed in that spot. More down-to-earth individuals believe that the reason is geological. Sandy soil in the area is too unstable to hold trees growing upright. The most popular is the idea that strong winds blowing from the water influence the shape of the trees. In any case, experts haven't come to the final conclusion yet. Potomsky Crater is described as a mount with a perfect shape. Its size is more than that of a 25-story building. It sits in the middle of the woods with its top chopped off and presents quite a sight. In fact, the shape of the crater is pretty unusual. It has a rounded inner dome that is about 40 feet high. At first sight, this formation looks like a volcano, but after a closer examination, you might realize that it's not the case. The dome in the center of the cone is extremely unusual for a volcano. In addition, there haven't been any volcanoes in this region for millions of years, while the age of the crater is estimated to be about 250 years. The weird shape that the crater has is like nothing scientists have ever seen. This, as well as the fact that any theory fails to explain the origin of the formation, adds to the mystery around it. And that's not the most terrifying thing. After researchers analyzed the growth rings of the trees near the crater, they found out that the trees experienced a period of strangely accelerated growth that lasted for 40 years. After that, they began to grow as they were supposed to. The level of radiation near the crater is also higher than in the nearby areas. No one has an explanation for this fact. On top of that, nothing grows on the blood-chilling formation. Perhaps because the crater also has a lovely habit of constant shifting. It rises and falls, influenced by some inexplicable force. Locals believe in the evil that dwells in that place. While exploring the Amazon rainforest, researchers discovered gigantic geoglyphs. They're geometrical drawings carved into the ground. The trenches were as large as 36 feet wide and 13 feet deep. They were created at different times, most between the 1st to the 15th century. There are more than 450 geoglyphs in the north of Bolivia and Brazil. The most ancient of them could have been created around 3,000 years ago. The huge earthworks were likely used for common meetings and discussions, but scientists haven't found enough proof yet.
At the end of December 2021, an underwater volcano with a rather exotic name, Hunga Tonga, woke up after several years of sleeping. It did that with so much energy and strength that people heard the eruption from over 100 miles away. Then it went back to sleep. But a couple of weeks later, it woke up again with a force 7 times greater than the first time. It broke the island above it in 2 parts. The lightning storm that started because of the eruption was the most intense in recorded history. The sound waves from the eruption traveled around the planet several times. Someone even heard a loud boom from it in Alaska. And it started the first known mega-tsunami since ancient times. This tsunami took the lives of 2 people as far as Peru and caused trouble for 2 fishermen in California. But that's not all. This eruption could change the weather patterns on Earth for years. You may see the first proof in the summer of 2024, which is forecast to become much wetter than usual. Scientists believe the eruption was caused by gas building up to a critical point. Different minerals, including anhydrite quartz and sulfides, were building up for several months until they blocked the flow paths and sealed the gas within Hunga Tonga. Normally, when a volcano erupts, the fumes cause a temporary cooling effect on Earth's surface. But Hunga Tonga's eruption was different. It didn't produce much fumes, but released a massive amount of water vapor, roughly equal to 60,000 Olympic swimming pools. The intense heat of the eruption turned huge amounts of seawater into steam, which then blasted high into the atmosphere. All that water vapor ended up in the stratosphere, a layer of the atmosphere that's too dry to form clouds or rain. Scientists don't have any observations of volcanic eruptions like Hunga Tonga to predict its effects on our weather patterns. They can't tell exactly how long these effects might last either. This is because the only way to measure stratospheric water vapor is with satellites, which have only been around since 1979, and there hasn't been an eruption similar to Hunga Tonga in that time. Experts from different countries started analyzing satellite data right after the Hunga Tonga eruption. They wanted to find out how long water vapor would stay in the stratosphere, where it would go, and, most importantly, what this would mean for the planet. The first big result of the eruption, at least partially, was a huge hole in the stratosphere that was hanging on for several months in 2023. By the time it appeared, the water vapor had reached the polar stratosphere over Antarctica. In the following years, there wouldn't be enough water vapor left to enlarge this hole. It looks like Hunga Tonga will have just a minimal effect on global average temperatures. But there are some surprising, lasting regional impacts. One of the scientific models forecasts colder and wetter winters for northern Australia until about 2029. In North America, it predicts warmer winters, and Scandinavia could have even colder winters. This is just one study though, and one approach to understanding how the eruption of Hunga Tonga can change our weather. We do have at least one example from history when a volcano eruption changed the world. Over 2 centuries ago, in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted and caused the year without a summer. In the following year, the winter was unusually cold and wet weather across Europe and North America. A recent study confirms that 1816 wouldn't have been this cold without the volcanic eruption. The immediate effects of the eruption were catastrophic, with tsunamis destroying homes, claiming 10,000 lives, and 80,000 more who fell ill in the aftermath. The eruption of Mount Tambora was one of the strongest in the last 1,000 years. It had ejected an enormous amount of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, which quickly spread across the world. It resulted in the coldest year in at least the last 250 years. In May, frost wiped out most of the crops in New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. By June, heavy snow covered the ground in Albany, New York, and Dennisville, Maine, and New Jersey had 5 straight nights of frost. The cold continued into late summer, which should have been the harvest season. In July, lakes and rivers were still frozen as far south as northwestern Pennsylvania, and frost stayed in Virginia until late August. Temperatures would drop from above normal summer highs to near freezing within just a few hours. the weather was completely unpredictable. Prices of food skyrocketed. The cost of oats for horses, which were the main mode of transportation, also rose sharply. Some people believe this situation inspired Carl Drees to invent the bicycle in 1817 as an alternative transportation method. Tambora changed weather patterns completely for not just 1, but 3 years. The whole planet got colder, and as crops failed, probably at least 1 million people starved. Scientists don't have solid evidence of volcano eruptions that have taken more lives than Tambora. But the Krakatoa eruption in Indonesia in 1883 is far more famous than Tambora because information about it spread worldwide via telegrams and photos. Its final blast was the loudest recorded sound in history, and people could hear it on 10% of the entire Earth's surface. The eruption started a tsunami with waves about half as tall as the Statue of Liberty. Still, it was less powerful than Tambora's eruption. The island that once hosted Krakatoa disappeared in the eruption, but new eruptions began less than 50 years later and created the Child of Krakatau cone in the center of the caldera of the old eruption. The new volcano still comes to life from time to time. Mount Vesuvius's eruption, which took down Pompeii, is one of the most well-known volcanic disasters in history. It took around 2,000 lives, much fewer than Tambora. According to a famous Roman author of that time, the eruption lasted 18 hours. Pompeii was covered by a layer of ash and pumice that was thicker than twice an average human height. The nearby coastline also changed dramatically. In today's world, the after effects of volcanic eruptions are often more dangerous than the eruption themselves. Thanks to advances in technology, we can now predict volcanic eruptions more accurately and use safety measures like evacuations and flight cancellations. But there's still a lot of risk that changes in weather patterns and drought all over the world, especially in areas like India, East Asia, and East Africa that are affected by monsoons. Volcano eruptions can also have effects you wouldn't probably expect, like the evolution of dinosaurs. These guys were once the size of cats, waiting for their time to shine. It came around 230 million years ago. This time is known as the Carnian pluvial episode. Before it, Pangaea was a dry and arid supercontinent. But then, there were 4 major volcanic events that pumped huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Global temperatures and humidity spiked because of it. These massive eruptions most likely happened because of the Wrangellia Large Igneous Province eruption in what is now British Columbia and Alaska. This prolonged volcanic activity created the right conditions for dinosaurs to blossom and diversify, and also for the rise of other groups, like modern conifers, ferns, crocodiles, turtles, insects, and early mammals. With higher temperatures and more rainfall, terrestrial plants have evolved, and humidity-loving ones have become dominant. Without those changes in the world, we could have a completely different natural history. There's some solid proof that volcanic activity has really changed the weather patterns back then. Scientists have found layers in the Earth's core that show different types of carbon. It means there were 4 massive releases of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The data on mercury and carbon together shows that the spike in mercury levels was thanks to a major volcanic event that affected the global carbon cycle and not just local eruptions. If you think you're safe from violent tornadoes because you aren't living in the tornado alley, you could be dangerously wrong. It's shifting to the east. It looks like we're about to see fewer single tornado days and more days with multiple powerful tornadoes. And because they're shifting into more populated areas, they could take more lives and ruin more homes. There isn't enough time to build infrastructure to protect everyone from this fast-moving danger. So the least you can do to save yourself is learn as much as you can about it. About 1,200 tornadoes hit the US every year. You gotta thank the unique geography that sets up the perfect conditions for it, especially in spring and summer. Winds from the Pacific drop moisture over the Rockies and become dry and cool as they move east. They collide with warm, humid air streams from the Gulf of Mexico over the flat terrain. And that's how unstable air and wind shear, which are the perfect conditions for tornadoes, are born. Historically, tornadoes were most common in Tornado Alley. This term was first used in the 1950s by two meteorologists as the title for their research project to study extreme weather in Texas and Oklahoma. Northeastern Texas and south-central Oklahoma are precisely the areas we think of when we talk about Tornado Alley. But in the past 10 years or so, it has shifted eastward by up to 500 miles. Now, eastern Missouri, Arkansas, western Tennessee, Kentucky, northern Mississippi, and Alabama see more tornadoes. The storms of early 2023 are great proof that this trend is real. A violent tornado hit Rolling Fork, Mississippi, and another outbreak caused huge damage in the new Tornado Alley. Data from the past 2 years shows that large tornado outbreaks with multiple twisters from a single weather system are also moving eastward and becoming more frequent and intense. The Tornado Alley is shifting eastward mainly because of supercells. Those strong thunderstorms with rotating updrafts create new tornadoes. Supercells form when warm, humid air near the ground interacts with cool, dry air higher up. You can say that we're living in the middle of a natural experiment. We see changes in the basic ingredients for severe storms. But we don't know how significant these changes are. Experts predict that supercell storms will become more frequent in the late winter and early spring and less common in the late summer and fall. The air in recent years is getting warmer and moister, and the interactions between air masses more and more common. Experts explain that the atmosphere is becoming more unstable and the Gulf of Mexico sends more water vapor into the southeastern U.S. All these factors fuel the storms. Research also shows that the so-called dry line, which divides the wetter eastern U.S. from the drier western U.S., is shifting eastward too. This line has traditionally fallen along the 100th meridian, but has moved about 140 miles east since the late 1800s. This shift can affect where storms form, as the dry line works as a boundary for convection, where warm air rises and cold air sinks, fueling storms. Milder winters we've seen recently also mean more opportunities for unstable air masses to interact and form supercells earlier in the year. It's tricky to predict how the situation will change and how dangerous it is, because we don't have that much data on how weather patterns affect such short-lived events as tornadoes. The U.S. National Weather Service only began keeping tornado records in 1950, and they didn't catch many tornadoes in remote areas. Data shows that the number of days with tornadoes each year has decreased, but there's more tornado activity on those days when they do occur. The records also show that some years, tornadoes take the lives of up to 20 people across the U.S., and in other years, they take over 100 lives. But now, there are more people living in the paths of tornadoes because the U.S. population has more than doubled since 1950. And the Southeast, where tornado activity could go up, has way more residents now. Texas and Oklahoma are well prepared with tornado shelters, but areas in the Southeast are less equipped. Plus, there are many mobile homes in the Southeast which are vulnerable to windstorms. Tornadoes in this region often strike at night, and they are 2.5 times more likely to cause fatalities. We could possibly have more events like the 2008 Super Tuesday tornado outbreak. It hit the southern U.S. and lower Ohio Valley, and over just 15 hours, 87 tornadoes rushed through the area and caused massive trouble. 57 people lost their lives across 4 states and 18 counties, and many others were injured. The tornadoes were fueled by strong low-pressure systems that brought record warmth. There were supercells and rotating winds that produced these violent tornadoes. Early on February 5th, a squall line developed from eastern Texas to Missouri and moved east. One of the most intense tornadoes traveled 122 miles over 2 hours. By the early morning of February 6th, the severe weather threat shifted to the eastern U.S. It caused wind damage as the cold moved out to the Atlantic, with snow and freezing rain from Iowa to Quebec. It ruined many homes and even swept some of them from their foundation, made mobile homes fly, blew many vehicles and tractor trailers off Interstate 40, and threw some cars on trees. There were wind gusts over 50 miles an hour from Arkansas to Indiana, hail the size of softballs, toppled trees, and power outages everywhere. Some areas were flooded because of heavy rains and melting snow. All this led to over 1,000 flight cancellations at Chicago's O'Hare and disruptions at Toronto's airport. The data from scientists can help new areas of the U.S. prepare for more tornadoes coming their way. The people in authority will also need to improve community shelters and warning systems and educate the locals on tornado safety. You can also get prepared by learning 3 basic rules: get in, get down, and cover up. When you hear the warning for an upcoming tornado, get into the most interior room in your house and stay away from doors and windows. If you have a basement or an underground tornado shelter, hide there. If not, just be on the lowest floor possible. You can use whatever's at hand to protect yourself from debris. Clothing, pillows, blankets, a mattress, or a bulky table. Anything will do. There's a tip that says that the bathroom is the safest place to hide. It makes sense because those are mostly right in the center of homes. In March 2023, a man and his girlfriend in Rolling Fork, Mississippi survived a tornado in their bathtub. It got thrown into the air but landed safely amid the wreckage of their mobile home. But there's actually nothing extra safe about being in a bathtub with a mattress. Closets and walk-in showers that are deep inside the building can also offer good protection. Don't use elevators. You can get trapped inside if there's a power outage. Stay in your shelter until you're sure the tornado threat is over. If you can, listen for updates from the National Weather Service, local radio, or TV. Multiple tornadoes can hit the same area, so it might not be safe to leave even after one has passed. When you do leave your shelter, be very careful. There could be flooding, debris, collapsing buildings, and blocked roads. Stay away from fallen power lines and puddles with wires in them, and don't use matches or lighters in case of gas leaks. Stay away from damaged buildings as they could collapse at any time. Being in a car during a tornado isn't much safer than being out in the open or in a parking lot. Many people get injured trying to drive away from storms. Tornadoes can produce hailstones the size of softballs and can easily smash a windshield. If you find yourself outside when a tornado hits, try to get inside any building you can find. If that's not possible, get as low as you can. Even a ditch or culvert can be safer than your vehicle.
As with many other crazy internet discoveries, it all kickstarted on Reddit with a wild post about wicked forest designs. Just take a gander on Google Earth and hit up the history tool to watch epic transformations from barren valleys to densely populated areas teeming with lush green tree plantations. Currently, Uruguay has approximately 2.7 million acres of artificial forests. Just to put that into perspective, it would take you around 15 to 20 minutes to walk across 1 acre, depending on how fast your pace is. You could spend a lifetime just walking around those artificial Uruguayan forests. But how did they emerge, and how did they reach this scale? So there's this process called afforestation, where trees are planted in previously non-forested areas. This initiative was implemented as part of a larger plan to increase the country's forest cover, resulting in Uruguay now exporting an impressive $2 billion worth of wood pulp annually. Despite native forests only covering 5% of the country, these artificial forests occupy a significant 6%. Another cool thing about these forests is that they have special trees that originally couldn't be found in Uruguay. It was decided to plant eucalyptus trees there, as they show impressive results in terms of how fast they grow. A tree can get through a whole cycle, from a little plant to one ready to be harvested, in as little as 10 years. Yeah, not as impressive as bamboo, that grows a couple of feet a day, but still faster than a common Uruguay tree called the Tree of Heaven, which takes about 25 years to get full-sized. By the way, it's considered pretty fast too. Now this funky forest in Japan is literally turning heads. In the Miyazaki Prefecture, there's a group of Japanese cedar trees that are causing a buzz with their unique concentric circles reaching toward the sky. A recent aerial photo captured these crop circles, and now everyone is scratching their heads trying to figure out how they came to be. But fear not, there's no extraterrestrial invasion involved. It turns out this cool formation was actually a carefully planned project from almost half a century ago. Back in 1973, researchers planted these trees in specific radial increments to create these mesmerizing circles. 50 years ago, Google Earth was nowhere around. But looking at that forest, you might think that the Japanese have been preparing to boast their forest on the internet for half a century. Now, what's even more fascinating is how the trees grew in a curved shape, spreading out in an unexpected way. Originally meant to be harvested after 5 years, there's now talk of preserving this circular forest because of all the newfound interest. Now, look at this portal in the forest. There's no way it could have emerged naturally, right? If your first guess was that it was a piece of contemporary art, you were right. So this portal is located in southern Estonia, and it was created by Finnish artist, this guy. This portal is far from being his only creation. He's had other crazy projects too. Like, he once sailed to Estonia in a boat made of bark. He also chopped down a forest plot, sorted all the materials for months, and then made an installation the same size as the original plot. There was even a time when he cut a line in ice with a chainsaw and ended up in a freezing swamp. This guy definitely knows how to surprise people. Most of his works are nature-related, so you probably shouldn't be surprised that this forest portal is yet another creation of his. What do you think the artist wanted to convey through this portal? Let us know in the comments. Trees are something that are definitionally straight, right? Well, not as long as you're in the crooked forest in Poland. Near the ground, the trees there bend sharply to the north, then magically straighten back up after a little detour of 3 to 9 feet. It's like they're doing the limbo, but with trees. The mystery of how these trees ended up swerving like they're on a roller coaster is still unsolved. Some think humans might have intervened to create some funky furniture or boat-building material, while others blame it on a wild snowstorm. Nobody knows for sure. Regardless of how they got this way, the Crooked Forest is a hot spot for tourists and nature lovers. If you ever come to Poland, make sure to visit this nature's wonder. Welcome to the Goblin Forest, a magical section of East Egmont that will make you feel like you've stepped into a fairy tale. This enchanting forest, also known as the Kamahiwa, is famous for the abundance of gnarly kamahi trees that give the whole place an eerie yet stunning vibe. As you hike through the Goblin Forest, you'll be surprised by lush greenery, moss-covered trees, and falling rays of sun that create a truly enchanting atmosphere. It's a photographer's dream come true. Now, while you might not find real goblins or mythical creatures in the forest, yeah, I know, it's a bummer, you will still encounter a variety of native bird species. Birdwatchers will be in heaven spotting all the feathered friends flitting about, and all that alliteration. Plus, if you're lucky, you might even catch a glimpse of glowworms lighting up the trails. With a network of well-maintained hiking trails suitable for all fitness levels, the Goblin Forest is the perfect destination for adventurers looking for a magical experience in nature. So, grab your hiking boots and get ready to explore this enchanted forest of wonders. Monteverde Cloud Forest in Costa Rica is not your typical forest adventure. Think of high-flying suspension bridges and trails above the treetops. On foggy days, you can wander through misty clouds for a mystical vibe. This nature reserve is called a cloud forest, and it's a real scientific definition. Cloud forests differ from your average ones in several aspects. First, they're usually evergreen forests that are like tropical oases, with a constant veil of low-level clouds covering the canopy. The next thing that's different is moss. It's so abundant there that these places are sometimes even nicknamed mossy forests. Going back to Monteverde Cloud Forest, however, it's more impressive if you visit it on a foggy day. But even on clear days, the views of the lush greenery are absolutely stunning. Now, if a regular forest sounds a bit boring to you, our planet has something more fun to offer. How about an underwater forest? Whether you're a local Oregonian or just passing through, Clear Lake is definitely a dive spot you've got to check out. True to its name, Clear Lake lives up to its reputation, with crystal-clear waters boasting up to 100 feet of visibility. It's like swimming in a massive pool. But brace yourself, because it's a chilly 38 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. Nah, I wouldn't venture in there. It's more adapted for penguins, I guess. Well, never mind. This lake is special because of its history. It was formed over 3,000 years ago by volcanic activity that redirected a river, preserving ancient trees that you can still see standing tall underwater today. There's this section known as underwater forest, where you can see ancient trees deep down. An underwater forest walk sounds fancy, doesn't it? And in Madagascar, there's not a forest, but an avenue of trees. But the trees are so majestic, this avenue can rival with the coolest actual forest. I'm talking about these awesome, gigantic baobab trees. Picture this, an 850-foot stretch of road lined with 20 to 25 massive baobabs, towering at about 100 feet tall. In terms of height, it's as if this alley was packed with many Rio's Christ the Redeemer statues. Even a 6-foot guy would feel insecure there. And if you venture just 4 miles away, you'll find the baobab amaru, 2 baobabs that grew twisted together like a love story. Legend has it that they represent an impossible love between 2 young villagers who dreamt of a life together. Now they stand there, intertwined for eternity. So in Westbrook, Maine, people saw an enormous ice disk in January 2019. This disk was like a wintry carousel. It was spinning away in the Penobscot River. Residents called it everything from an icy lazy Susan to a frozen spinning wheel. It was estimated to be around 300 feet wide, which made it one of the biggest ice disks ever seen. Weirdly, the spinning ice disk notion isn't new. They've shown up in places like Russia and Washington before. They were almost always a perfect circle. So why do they happen? Well, some scientists in 1997 thought it was because river water created a whirlpool effect around a chunk of ice, smoothing it out to be perfectly circular. Yet, in 2016, other scientists claimed that river currents helped these disks get started, but temperature changes kept them twirling. Warmer water makes the ice melt and sink, creating a vortex that keeps the disk spinning. The warmer the water, the faster it spins. Ever heard of the Erdstall lights of Norway? They aren't the same as northern lights. Think of these lights as glowing balls. They have been seen since at least the 1930s. These luminous wonders show up in all sorts of colors and shapes. Sometimes they flicker, and other times they just chill in the air. The Erdstall lights can show up 10 to 20 times a week. They appear both during the day and at night. They can last for just a few seconds or hover for over an hour. Interestingly, nobody has a clue about what exactly they are. The efforts to understand these lights include Project Erdstall, started in 1983, and later projects like the Triangle Project. Despite ongoing research, there's no consensus on the origin of the lights. Some suggested explanations include misperception of celestial bodies, aircraft, or mirages. One theory ties the lights to airborne dust from mining, while another mentions plasma, formed by ionized air and dust during radon decay. Okay. Ringing rocks is a cool geological thing you probably didn't know about, and it's our next stop on the Mysterious Natural Phenomena Tour. You can find them in Bucks County in the U.S. If you give these rocks a hit with a hammer or another rock, they start ringing. Scientists have been studying them, but the mystery remains. There are different hypotheses about this one too. Things like the size and shape of the boulders and how they're stacked can affect the sounds they make. But that alone doesn't give them the ability to ring. Even though the sound is often described as metallic, it's likely because of the rock's density and internal stress, not just its iron content. A scientific experiment from the 1960s suggested that the ringing ability came from some internal stress, not external weathering. The live rocks found in the middle of boulder fields showed expansion or relaxation after being cut, indicating internal elastic stresses. A slow weathering rate in dry fields could cause these stresses. The relic stress theory suggests that these boulders act like guitar strings. A de-stressed boulder gives a dull thud, but a stressed one resonates at different frequencies. The boulders can still ring when removed from their fields, leading to myths about stealing them. Most fields are now cleared of smaller ringers, and breaking large boulders stops the ringing. Large equipment is needed to move the remaining small ringers, weighing over a ton. Now let's talk about the Naga fireballs. They only show up along the Mekong River in Asia. These picky fireballs hang out in just a 155-mile stretch of the river. The reddish glowing balls rise naturally from the water into the air. Their scope ranges from small particles to the size of a basketball. The reported number of fireballs varies from tens to thousands per night. They can be spotted all year round, but they seem to go wild during the full moon in late autumn. Why? Well, that's just another one of their little mysteries. Some have tried to explain the phenomenon scientifically. One theory suggests that flammable phosphine gas from the marshy environment could be the cause. However, skeptics argue that spontaneous ignition isn't likely to be the reason. Another scientific explanation involves free-floating plasma orbs created when surface electricity is discharged into a solution. Still, these typically occur in controlled settings during experiments, and not naturally. We can carry on with ball lightning. It's a super rare thing, a glowing ball that shows up in the air. It likes to make an appearance close to the ground during thunderstorms, hanging out with regular lightning. It can be red, orange, yellow, white, or blue, and it's often accompanied by a hissing sound and a funky smell. This flashy sphere of light is a quick show. It lasts just a few seconds, zooming around, and then poof! It's gone, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a little pop. Ball lightning might seem like a troublemaker, but it's usually harmless. Sure, it's been known to burn or melt stuff on occasion, but it's not out to get us. Scientists aren't entirely sure why it happens or how it's related to regular lightning. People have been tossing around ideas like weird air or gas behavior, high-density plasma stuff, or even a vortex of glowing gases. Even microwave radiation trapped in a plasma bubble is on the list. But don't get it confused with bead lightning. That's a different one, more like a string of beads. And it happens when a bolt of lightning sticks around for a good chunk of a second. Shh! We're now at the Mapini Silent Zone. It's this spot near this place in Mexico. The story goes that in this desert patch, you can't pick up any radio signals or talk to anyone. In July 1970, a rocket from Utah went off course and landed here. It was carrying some sort of cobalt. Authorities had to haul away tons of soil from the crash site. Now, thanks to the cleanup, the Silent Zone is wrapped up in myths. People talk about weird magnetic stuff messing with radios and about plants and critters going through mutations. Well, locals go with it, boosting tourism in the region. Alright, we can now talk a bit about the sun. Well, it's not just a big ball of fire. It's got an outer layer called the corona. Think of it as an invisible sun jacket made of gases. You usually can't see it because the sun is super bright. But there's a trick. During a total solar eclipse, when the moon slides between us and the sun, the corona shows up, all glowing and white. The corona is scorching hot, even hotter than the sun's surface, which is kinda weird. Scientists are on a mission to crack this heat mystery. They found something called heat bombs shooting from the sun into the corona, exploding and warming things up even more. But that might be just one piece of the puzzle. You see, the sun's surface is like a playground covered in magnetic fields. These magnetic fields create cool shapes on the sun, like loops and streamers. Special telescopes help us see these cool patterns up close. The corona stretches way out into space, and from there, it sends out the solar wind that moves through our solar system. Its particles are so speedy that they escape the sun's gravity. So, there's this cool spot called Kuala Sangalore Beach that you can only check out when the tide is low. The timing changes every day, and you can't get there when the tide is high. Most of the time, it's hiding under the sea, not even on the map. But when the tide's just right, bam, it pops up. Kind of like Malaysia's own version of Salar de Uyuni. People call it the mirror of the sky because when it's not underwater, it turns into a giant reflection of the sky. An awesome spot for cool Instapics. Besides being a sweet travel spot, it's also home to a bunch of marine life, like sea and baby clams that live all over the sandy shores. Planet Earth is full of wondrous phenomena. I mean, can you imagine going for a midnight swim and suddenly finding yourself surrounded by a glowing blue haze? As if there were huge pillars of light coming out of the seabed directly toward the surface. This experience is rare, but it sure is magical. This chemical reaction is known as bioluminescence, and it can happen in different situations. One example is when tiny algae organisms migrate closer to the seashore. When these algae are disturbed, they try to defend themselves by glowing, and just happens to create the most beautiful spectacle. There's another place in the world where you can see a similar thing, but it's caused by a different creature. This place is in New Zealand. Hidden deep within the country's caves live glowworms. They're the larvae of medium-sized narrow beetles that happen to be luminescent. If you're lucky enough to tour these caves, you'll feel like floating inside an underground galaxy. Recently, a video of a super rare phenomenon started circulating on the web. Take a quick look at it and see if you can make out what it is. Okay, it looks like a river, right? But it doesn't look as if any water is flowing there. When the Iraqis first saw this happening, they didn't know what it was, so they just called it the Sand River. It sure was a good guess, but a flowing river of sand would be something too out of this world to be true. It turns out that what these people saw was more or less an optical illusion. It's not sand, but it's not exactly water either. Here's what happened. In arid environments, it's not so uncommon for hail to fall. And in the case of Sand River, what we actually see is thousands and thousands of floating hailstones. Oh, and if you don't know what hail is, it's frozen rain that pours down in the form of small pebbles of ice. That would be something to see. Say you're driving through the countryside and suddenly spot a mushroom-shaped cloud. Uh-oh. Or maybe it's a spaceship of another civilization. You don't quite know what it is, but you do realize that it's huge. Should you continue driving toward it, or should you turn around and drive in the other direction? Well, you should know that a cloud like this indicates a huge thunderstorm is happening inside. And not just a storm, but a mesocyclone. A mesocyclone is a rotating updraft that can span several miles. It's usually accompanied by torrential rains and strong winds. So, if I were you, I'd turn that car around and head in the opposite direction. Whew. You know Thor? I guess he might live inside this next natural phenomenon. Sometimes, when a volcano erupts, this process can be accompanied by huge thunderbolts. Scientists often refer to it as volcanic lightning. They're still debating why this thing occurs. One of their guesses is that when a volcano erupts, it projects positively charged debris into the atmosphere. These charges then react with the already present negative charges, which can produce a bolt of lightning. Cool, huh? The first time anyone witnessed something like this was during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. Nah, it wasn't me. But here I am wondering, were there or were there not any sightings of Thor? Hey, sometimes when I work out too much, I get Thor. Now, all the way down in Senegal, Africa, we'll witness another unbelievable sight. Some 18 miles north of Dakar, the country's capital, there is a unique lake. Arriving there, you might imagine you're walking out of a spaceship and stepping on an unknown planet. After all, have you ever seen real-life pink water before? Lake Retba, or Lac Rose, as the locals call it, has become internationally famous for being vivid pink. And yes, you can swim there if you'd like to. But you should know that the water there is extremely salty. Lake Retba is known to be one of the world's saltiest lakes, with a saline level of over 40%. And in case you're wondering why the water is pink, I assure you this has nothing to do with otherworldly factors. It's actually due to high levels of salt. The algae, Dunaliella salina, is responsible for the pink hue. These algae produce the red pigment that absorbs sunlight, giving the lake its striking pink color. But if you'd like to see the lake at its brightest, you should go there during the dry season, between November and June. During other months, rainwater dilutes the pigment, and the color of the lake becomes less distinct. Lake Retba has turned into a famous international attraction recently because who wouldn't love a picture of them swimming in the pink water? You might have heard of the Aurora Borealis, aka the Northern Lights. This phenomenon has continued to mesmerize scientists and tourists alike ever since it was witnessed for the first time. Now to see it, you have to be pretty lucky. You'll need to travel to the extreme north or south points of our planet. And even then, you'll have to hunt this phenomenon down and hope the sky will put on a show for you. The Aurora Borealis is an extremely rare phenomenon. And although these greenish lights look delicate, they're actually the fruit of a rather rough event. This spectacular light show occurs when energized particles from the sun slam into Earth's upper atmosphere. But it sure is a sight to behold, isn't it? Can you imagine a hill that never stops burning? Located in the Arctic region of Canada, the so-called Smoking Hills are an unmatched sight on our planet. And here, things get a little science fiction-y, since some of the minerals found in these hills have only been discovered outside Earth, on the surface of Mars. The ground of the Smoking Hills has been releasing smoke for at least a couple hundred years, non-stop. Explorers thought the area was home to an active volcano, but that wasn't the case. As science explains, the soil in the area is formed by sulfur and coal, and when these elements get in contact with oxygen, they spontaneously ignite, releasing constant smoke. I just want to warn you, don't get any touristy ideas. The environment is extremely hostile to people. The smoke is toxic, and its temperatures are dangerously high. So let's move on before smoke gets in our eyes. Hey, there's a song there. Have you ever heard of something called a natural snowball? This can be proof that nature is really perfect. In 2016, the beaches of the Gulf of Aab, a bay in the Arctic Ocean, filled up with rows and rows of giant snowballs. Think balls measuring up to 3 feet across. This is a rare yet beautiful phenomenon that happens when smaller pieces of ice end up getting rolled by strong winds and water. The further they roll, the more ice they gather and the more polished this ice becomes. Such snowballs end up as giant, perfectly shaped spheres. They look pretty amazing on their own, but hundreds of them together? Wow, think of it. You could have a snowball fight between giants. There are also some snowballs that turn into huge rolling donuts. This shape occurs only in perfect temperature conditions when the snow is both hard and fluffy. A snowball begins rolling down, gathering more and more snow until, suddenly, its middle part collapses. This way, the snowball acquires its donut shape. Does it also taste as good as a donut? No. Now, let's say you go for a hike, but instead of blue skies, you see a huge cloud of fog. Now, this may ruin your photo ops, but there's one thing you can hope for. Foggy days are perfect for a phenomenon known as the fog bow. Its other name is the white rainbow. It occurs because of the tiny size of water droplets that form the fog. They're even smaller than 2/1000ths of an inch. You know, teeny tiny. So instead of a multicolored rainbow, you get a transparent one with red outer edges and a bluish inner border. Cool. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.